Chapter 173. Xia Jun's expression darkened and a trace of emotion flashed across his eyes. This emotion was fleeting, but after a moment, he smiled faintly and said, "Cousin, what do you mean by this? Cousin and I have half of the Xia family's blood flowing in our veins, so we must treat each other with sincerity. There's no need to speak in riddles. Biaodi, now that you've fallen to such a state, unable to become an official and can only secretly work for His 8th Highness, unable to obtain the official position and glory that you deserve, who gave you all of this?" Jiang Chao laughed. "You and I both know the answer." Xia Jun smiled as he looked at Jiang Chao. He was different from Jiang Chao. Although Jiang Chao had been working under Xianli and now seemed to be rising in his official career, at best, Xia Yan had protected him too well at that time, and his brain was not enough. Moreover, Jiang Chao had inherited Jiang Quan's cowardly and wavering character, and often thought himself clever. For example, Xia Jun clearly knew that Jiang Chao was deliberately saying these words for him to hear, but he did not bat an eyelid. "Working for 8th Prince is my glory, I dare not complain. As for cousin's promotion, it is cousin's luck. My luck is not good, so I can't blame others," Xia Jun said. Hearing this, Jiang Chao looked deeply at Xia Jun. Xia Jun was an unfathomable person. At that time, it was the imperial edict that forbade him from entering officialdom, but Xia Jun unexpectedly became Xian Li's advisor. Jiang Chao had already figured out some of Xian Li's habits, and he never used people without ability. Xia Jun's identity was special, but to be able to make Xian Li look at him in a new light, he certainly had great ability. Jiang Chao was a narrow-minded person. Although he had many taboos against Xia Jun, now that the situation was different, he could only conspire with Xia Jun. "To tell the truth, cousin, this time it is 8th Prince's intention." Knowing that he would not be able to gain any advantage if he continued to beat around the bush, Jiang Chao simply made things clear. He said, "8th Prince ordered me to do this, but I feel that this matter can be improved, but I need cousin's help." Xia Jun slowly reached out and poured himself a cup of wine. The wine rippled slightly, emitting an alluring mellow fragrance. Xia Jun raised the wine cup, but was not in a hurry to drink it. Instead, he slightly narrowed his eyes, as if smelling the wine. Slowly, he said, "Oh. So, cousin, what good will it do me if I do this? How far can this matter go?" He was not in a hurry to ask what it was, nor did he ask how to do it. The first thing he asked was the result. This showed that Xia Jun was a person who did not care about using any means. No matter what it was, he only wanted a satisfactory result. Jiang Chao lowered his voice, but a trace of coldness flashed across his face. "What's the result?" "It all depends on how big cousin's chips are." "How about the entire Xia family?" Xia Jun smiled. Jiang Chao was stunned. He carefully looked at the person in front of him. Xia Jun's face was handsome, but his eyes were a little gloomy. His eyes suddenly emitted a hint of light, like a hungry wolf on the brink of death in the wilderness who suddenly discovered a prey. There was a kind of crazy excitement. Jiang Chao forcefully suppressed the shock in his heart, thinking that his cousin was indeed a madman. However, on the surface, he said solemnly, "Then, I promise cousin that after this matter is over, there will no longer be a General Fu, nor will there be any embroidered uniform guard, and even more so, there will be no Jiang Wan and her sister." He said, "At that time, Hong and Junju will naturally be personally delivered to cousin's hands. Whatever cousin wants to do, you can do it. This chip." It was indeed very tempting. A pair of slightly raised charming eyes appeared in front of Xia Jun's eyes. When that pair of charming eyes was not looking at people, it was as if they were separated by a thin layer of mist, cold and calm. When they were looking at people, there was a hint of ridicule, as if ridiculing the other party's ignorance and childishness. In this life, the first half of his life had been extravagant. He had the wind and the rain, and as long as he wanted something, there was nothing he could not obtain. However, This balance had been broken by Jiang Ruan. She had only used a small trick, and it had completely destroyed his beautiful and splendid life. He did not have much of an obsession with being an official, but Jiang Ruan had challenged his dignity. In his opinion, if he had taken a fancy to Jiang Ruan, she should have obediently obeyed. Who would have known that she was not an obedient house cat, but a terrifying female leopard? She had only slightly flashed her claws, but she had already let people have a taste of her fierceness. However, no matter how fierce a leopard was, it was still just prey. All these years, he had seen Jiang Ruan change from an unfavored daughter who had been raised in a rural residence to the eldest daughter whom everyone in the Jiangfu feared. From an official's daughter to a Junju whom the Empress Dowager relied on. He had seen her defeat Jiang Li in Jiangsu Su, defeat Xia Yan, and even Xia Jiao Jiao's matter. He had never seen such a woman, but because of this, he had become interested in her. Such a woman, scheming, strong and tenacious, with a beautiful appearance and a rotten heart, really suited his appetite. But, she dared to reject him, so she had to pay the price. Jiang Chao's proposal was really too tempting. A trace of a sigh flashed in his eyes. If Jiang Ruan was willing to obediently attach herself to him, that would certainly be good. Unfortunately, he knew what kind of person Jiang Ruan was. Jiang Ruan would not lower her noble head like anyone else, so he could only chop off that beautiful head. He said, "Biao Ji's proposal is indeed very interesting." Jiang Chao stared at him closely, and slowly, he heard Xia Jun's remaining words, "We can try." Jiang Chao then heaved a sigh of relief. Xia Jun looked at his wine cup indifferently and said, "I wonder what Biao Gu intends to do." Capturing the brocade guard and the General Fu in one fell swoop was certainly not an ordinary matter. Now that the Zhao family and the brocade guard were far away at the border, it was inevitable that they would act on the battlefield. A treacherous smile suddenly appeared on Jiang Chao's face. Before the troops and horses move, the provisions and fodder move first. Even if the brocade guard and the Zhao family army have enormous abilities, they will not be able to withstand running out of ammunition and provisions. For the time being, not mentioning the war in Shirong, the brocade guard repeatedly sent back news of victory. The morale of the brocade guard greatly increased, and they recovered several lost territories. Guan Lianghan's injuries also gradually stabilized, and the morale of the soldiers of the Great Jin dynasty gradually stabilized. On the contrary, the state of Tianjin changed from its previous valiant and fierce appearance. Even the best weapons and tactics could not save them from defeat. Everyone was surprised to discover that this Jining Wang, Xiao Xiao, who was known as a rebel and traitor in the Great Jin dynasty, could actually command good tactics. His military strategy was different from that of Guan Lianghan and Jiang Xing. It was a completely different style of conduct, cold, cruel, and absolutely like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. The brocade guard that he had brought with him were almost like indestructible iron men. Their valiance was like that of a lone wolf on the grasslands. No, they could not even compare to a lone wolf on the grasslands. 1 against 10, they were unstoppable. In front of such a troop, the soldiers of Tianjin were terror-stricken, and they retreated step by step in defeat. Xiao Xiao used a method that was not war to achieve victory. Ever since his arrival, the war with the state of Tianjin was no longer like a war, but more like a one-sided massacre. Even so, the war between the state of Tianjin and the Great Jin dynasty could not be settled overnight. At that time, in order to speed up the journey, the army had to travel as lightly as possible, and their rations were also brought according to the rules of close combat. The place where they fought with the state of Tianjin was located in a desolate desert, and there were no herdsmen or cattle or sheep in the vicinity, so there was a real shortage of rations. And the method of using war to sustain war was only suitable for predatory warfare. Now, it was too late, and it was not allowed. According to the rules of the Great Jin dynasty, the rations were gathered and transported by the courier station in the capital, and transported by the leader of the military supply troops, Sir Zhang. Zhang Ji had been the leader of the military supply troops for many years, and his travel expenses were the shortest. This was because the rations brought by the previous war had almost been consumed, and now the state treasury could not allocate too much extra rations. What was collected now was the rations collected from the common people everywhere. In a short period of time, this batch of rations would be quickly transported to the border of the state of Tianjin. This was the few remaining reserves of the great Jin dynasty. Xiao Xiao had to win the war before these rations were consumed, otherwise, he would only be defeated due to the exhaustion of rations. In Jining Wangfu, Jiang Wan put down the book in her hands and looked at the young man in purple in front of her. He was sitting opposite Jiang Wan, looking at her with a smile, and slowly waving the folding fan in his hand. If one were to ignore the mustache on his face that did not match his age, he would be an extremely handsome and elegant young master. Unfortunately, because of that mustache, this supposedly elegant and unrestrained action seemed somewhat comical. Qi Feng lived in a large courtyard separated from Jining Wangfu, which was also arranged by Xiao Xiao for him. He and Xia Qin lived together. If it were not for the fact that Jiang Ruan was in Jining Wangfu, Xiao Xiao would have directly let these two people live in Jining Wangfu. Now, although Qi Feng and Xia Qin did not live in Jining Wangfu, they were only separated by a wall, so they were very close. Third sister-in-law, Qi Feng waved his fan and said, "You specially called fourth younger brother over, I wonder what instructions do you have?" Qi Feng put on a very romantic appearance, but a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. He lived in 100 Zhonglu all year round and had a cold heart towards the imperial court. He usually hid in the dark and was not clear about the affairs of the great Jin court's inner courtyard. Therefore, he was not very clear about Jiang Ruan. On the way to the capital this time, he learned some things about Jiang Ruan's past and present from others. Regarding Jiang Ruan's evaluation, Guan Lianghan was resourceful and Mo Tsong was vicious and merciless. As for Xiao Xiao to be so protective, he was certainly not an ordinary person. Qi Feng did not underestimate Jiang Ruan, but he felt that no matter how smart she was still a woman. Women were always somewhat whimsical and sentimental. However, from the time he came to the capital and met Jiang Ruan until now, Jiang Ruan had not revealed a trace of longing for Xiao Xiao. Qi Feng felt that it was interesting. It seemed that the falling flowers yearn for love, but the heartless brook still flows. Xiao Xiao had now kicked an iron plate. Jiang Ruan looked at the young man in front of her and slowly revealed a smile. What kind of person was Qi Si? She had not come into contact with him. However, since Xiao Xiao said that Qi Si was a person who learned the power of the imperial court, there were some things that could not be better for him to come forward. She slowly said, "Today, I looked for young Master Qi to ask young Master Qi to save my life." Save my life? Qi Feng looked at Jiang Ruan and found that her expression did not seem to be joking. He thought for a moment, but did not rashly answer, "Third sister-in-law, I am not a doctor. If you want to save a life, you should look for Xiao Wu." He had not yet figured out Jiang Ruan's temperament. Unlike Xiao Xiao believed in Jiang Ruan because he liked her, but Qi Feng and Jiang Ruan did not have a deep friendship. He was always somewhat wary of Jiang Ruan. If Jiang Ruan wanted to take advantage of Xiao Xiao's absence and do something that would harm Xiao Xiao and Jining Wangfu, Qi Feng would not stand idly by. Even if he risked his life, he would still stop her. If it was one person's life, young Master Xia can indeed save it, but now it is the lives of tens of thousands of people. How can young Master Xia save them all? Jiang Ruan said lightly. Qi Feng slowly frowned, and the playful expression on his face completely disappeared. He said, "What does third sister-in-law mean? Fourth brother really does not understand. Young Master Qi is a smart person, why do you need to talk to me in a roundabout way?" Jiang Ruan's words were not polite, and could even be said to be somewhat direct, since young Master Qi and Xiao Xiao are from the same sect. they naturally have a deep friendship. Now that someone wants to plot against Xiao Xiao, I think that with young Master Qi's friendship with Xiao Xiao, you will definitely not stand idly by. It is reasonable for you to help him, right? Something happened to Third Master Xiao. There was some disbelief in Qi Feng's eyes. These days, he did not receive any news that something had happened to Xiao Xiao of Genie Wei. Jiang Ruan's words were indeed very suspicious. If something had happened to Xiao Xiao, he would be the first to know. He is not in trouble now, but if this goes on, something will happen soon. Jiang Ruan's voice was heavy. She looked directly at Qi Feng, and a trace of ridicule suddenly jumped into her beautiful eyes. The ridicule disappeared in a flash, and the dark light disappeared, turning into bright eyes that were as bright as colored glass, full of amorous feelings as she looked around. She said, "I think that before young Master Qi came, you must have heard about my matter. I have enmity with Jiang Chao and the Xiahou Fu. I made Jiang Chao lose a finger, and also made Xia Jun unable to enter the officialdom." Qi Feng originally wanted to take advantage of the situation to smile, but found that it was somewhat inappropriate to make this expression at this moment. He did indeed collect information about Jiang Ruan before coming. However, he did not know the significance of Jiang Ruan talking about these things now. After a pause, he said, "What about it? What does it have to do with third brother? Could it be that they will do something rebellious in order to take revenge?" "No," Jiang Ruan stared at Qi Feng. Qi Feng was shocked by her stare, only to hear Jiang Ruan continue to say, "What I want to say is that Jiang Chao and the Xia family's hatred for me is only on the surface. Jiang Chao and the Xia family are working for the 8th Prince Xianli, and Xiao Xiao has become a thorn in Xianli's side. Xiao Xiao is unwilling to cooperate with Xianli. For such a person who is unwilling to cooperate and whose power is beyond his control, Xianli only has one choice, and that is to kill." When Jiang Ruan talked about these secrets, she always behaved very calmly, as if she was not talking about the important matter of fighting for the throne, but discussing how good the weather was today. Qi Feng's expression was somewhat stiff. He heard Jiang Ruan's cold and calm voice coming from the opposite side, so, on the surface, it seems that Jiang Chao and the Xia family want to deal with me, but in fact, it is Xianli who wants to deal with Xiao Xiao, or rather, it is Xianli who wants to deal with the genie guards. Do you understand what I am saying? You. Jiang Ruan's words were too straightforward, so straightforward that Qi Feng did not know how to respond. He suddenly had a feeling that Jiang Ruan was indeed very suitable for Xiao Xiao. On the surface, Jiang Ruan was incomparably calm, a person who defended what was established, but in the dark, there was a hidden force of attack. From her eyes, he saw strength and tenacity. "I know Xianli very well. He will make good use of every opportunity, especially at this critical juncture. Now that Xiao Xiao has left the capital, there are only Zhao Yi and a few others left in the General Fu. This is the best opportunity. Xianli will certainly find a way to find something." She looked at the book in front of her. "I asked Xiao Xiao to give me a secret guard to monitor Jiang Chao. Jiang Chao met with Xia Jun a few days ago. They formed an alliance." Qi Feng asked, "The Xia family is not the same as before, how would they dare to act rashly?" "The Xia family naturally does not dare, but unfortunately, Xia Jun is a madman." Jiang Ruan smiled coldly. These few days, Zhang Darren of the military supply troops, Zhang Ji, seems to be very diligent. He is also extremely extravagant with his spending. He has even bought 3 large residences and 5 shops in the eastern part of the city. The amount of banknotes in the Bank of the Four Seas has also increased a lot. Young Master Qi, don't you think this is very strange? Zhang Ji. Qi Feng's expression turned cold. He studied the politics of the imperial court and naturally knew the officials of the court very well. Zhang Ji was an old man of the military supply troops. He was upright and full of talent. He had never made a mistake in transporting provisions for so many years. Jiang Ruan's words clearly showed that she was suspicious of Zhang Ji. On one hand, he felt surprised, but on the other hand, he could not believe it. Zhang Ji is a good official. If the water is too clear, there will be no fish. These silver tails may not necessarily be related to Xianli. Military supplies are important matters. Zhang Ji will not destroy his own future. If he knew something had happened, His Majesty would be the first to not spare him. He is indeed a good official. Unfortunately, he has a good-for-nothing son. Jiang Ruan said coldly. His 3 sons are all good young talents. How can you say that they are good for nothing? Qi Feng frowned. Zhang Ji has a doting mistress who gave birth to a son. This son spends all day outside drinking. Zhang Ji's wife is the daughter of Marquis Muyang. She is a powerful person. Zhang Ji does not dare to tell his wife that he has a son outside, but he cannot stop this son from spending money like water. The houses and shops in the east of the city, and even the silver tails, are all prepared for his son. I think Master Qi also knows that Zhang Ji dotes on his son. Qi Feng naturally knew that Zhang Ji was henpecked, but he did not know when Zhang Ji had an illegitimate son outside. Moreover, he did not know where Jiang Ruan knew these things. Zhang Ji loved his 3 sons very much. For a son born from a mistress outside, he felt guilty. Indeed, it was possible that he doted on his son even more. But, Qi Feng said, but the risk is too big. For a little money, he will sacrifice his own future and the life of his whole family. A smart person will not do this. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Indeed, it is just for a little money. It is not worthwhile for him to do this. However, what if he can make a meteoric rise because of this? He will no longer have to act according to Marquis Wu Mu, Madame Zhang's maiden family. He can openly welcome that doting mistress's son into the Fu, and can even find a good future for that illegitimate son. Do you think this bargaining chip is big enough? Qi Feng was stunned. Jiang Ruan coldly said, who does not want to bet on riches and honor? Moreover, if he wins the bet, the world will change. The Son of Heaven will not be the Son of Heaven, and the court will not be the court. Who will pursue the crime of deceiving the emperor? She slowly said word by word, the crime will only be borne by the loser. However, it is still unknown who will be the winner. I dare to bet on him. Chapter 174. Qi Feng sucked in a breath of cold air. Jiang Ruan's words shocked him, but what was even more shocking was her tone and expression, which had an indescribable ruthlessness and hostility. He suddenly discovered that the word poisonous woman that Mo Tsong said was not enough to describe Jiang Ruan. She was ruthless enough, and more importantly, she was bold enough. Ordinary women would not dare to say such treacherous words, but she had said it, and said it so naturally. The winner was king, and the loser was in the wrong. This was the truth of the court battles, but no one dared to say it clearly. After a long silence, he said, even if he really dares to do so, there are many people in the capital. If there is really a problem with the provisions, before they leave the city, they will be discovered and the matter will be exposed. Naturally, Zhang Ji will not have a good end. The 8th prince is not a fool. How can he let someone take advantage of something that could easily expose the target? Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Xianli is the most suspicious person, so he naturally will not use such a clumsy method. Therefore, the passive tampering of the provisions, at least within a few dozen miles of the city, will not have any problems. Moreover, he will definitely put on a show, and this show will be very exciting. The ultimate goal is to gain the trust of His Majesty. You. Qi Feng slightly narrowed his eyes. You seem to know the 8th prince very well. Jiang Ruan's words naturally carried a kind of familiarity with Xianli, which made Qi Feng's heart flash with a strange feeling. But how could a virtuous girl be familiar with Xianli? Even if she was a princess in the palace, such an understanding of a person's character, and even understanding of what the other party would do next, could only be grasped by people who were close to her. Qi Feng's heart flashed a guess. Could it be that Jiang Ruan admired Xian Li? Only when she admired someone, would she always pay attention to what he did, what he thought, and understand his every move. But when Qi Feng seriously looked at Jiang Ruan's expression, he secretly shook his head. Jiang Ruan's eyes were calm, and her smile was gentle, but it lacked affection. Looking at her actions and words, it did not seem that she was interested in Xianli, which made Qi Feng even more confused. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Jiang Ruan saw Qi Feng's puzzled gaze and smiled slightly. Sooner or later, Jining Wangfu will have to confront the eighth prince. Since it is a state of irreconcilable enmity, it is natural to make early preparations. Otherwise, it would not be good to be treated as a fool and end up dead. Her words were spoken softly, but Qi Feng was startled to hear that she was gnashing her teeth in anger. However, the other party's appearance was beautiful and her eyes were gentle. It was as if everything that had happened just now was an illusion. Even if Xianli wants to fight for the throne, it will not be so easy. Qi Feng smiled proudly. In this world, there are also people that he does not dare to provoke. Isn't third sister-in-law worrying too much? I guarantee that he doesn't have the guts to attack Jining Wangfu. Jiang Ruan's smile slowly turned cold. It was true that Qi Feng was well versed in the politics of the imperial court, and he might be able to use it to achieve his own goals. However, Qi Feng also had a weakness, and that was that he was not good at guessing people's minds. From Qi Feng's point of view, he regarded Xianli as a politician, a fighting prince, and predicted his actions. However, Xianli's behavior would not be that of a fixed prince. Jiang Ruan viewed Xianli as a selfish and cunning man who was good at enduring silently. This man would use everything that could be used, including timing. She had been by this man's side for so many years, and her understanding of him was deep to the bone. Qi Feng was not as good as her. So, is young Master Qi willing to help me? Jiang Ruan said lightly. Qi Feng was stunned. He suddenly realized that in the short words that Jiang Ruan had just said, he had already been shaken. Jiang Ruan's words had indeed made him suffer a lot. Unconsciously, he had already agreed with Jiang Ruan's words. He frowned. Third brother and I will prosper together, and we will both suffer together. I am duty-bound to help third brother. Third sister-in-law, he said slowly. We cannot beat the grass and startle the snake in this matter. We might as well let the secret guards continue to monitor Zhang Ji, and then find someone to guard the Xia Fu and Jiang Fu. At least, if we want to stop him, we need to find a foolproof plan. Why should we stop him? Jiang Ruan asked lightly. Qi Feng was startled and looked at her puzzledly. What do you mean? There is a kind of bitterness in this world. It is that one cannot share success with others, and one cannot talk about grievances with others. Since Xia Jun and Jiang Chao want to do this in the dark, I will make them suffer in silence, unable to voice their bitterness. Young Master Qi is used to playing politics in the open, but I feel that sometimes, it is more convenient to do things in the dark. This time, I want them to pay the price. Shocked by the sudden burst of coldness in that pair of beautiful eyes, Qi Feng could not help but be stunned. He felt that when this charming young girl became ruthless, there was a kind of threatening beauty that bloomed in an instant. He had never met such a woman, and could not help but let out a long sigh. So, third sister-in-law, what do you think we should do? Jiang Ruan looked at him with a smile. I know that young Master Qi also has a status in the court. The eighth prince will certainly put on a big show, and young Master Qi will arrange someone to go and call for this show. This way, it will be fun. He even told you this? Qi Feng was startled again, and then smiled bitterly. Forget it, you are the young madam of Jining Wangfu, there is nothing wrong with telling you. In the future, please take care of me, third sister-in-law. This time, please advise me. Jiang Yuan nodded lightly, and a trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. In the palace. In the imperial garden, the empress was drinking tea and talking with a few beauties. The courtyard was full of orioles and swallows, and all of them were graceful and charming. However, the empress, who was sitting on the main seat, could not hide the old look on her face even though she was dressed in fine clothes. The crown prince was increasingly not favored. Although the emperor did not explicitly order the crown prince to be deposed, the crown prince's participation in the court's affairs was not as good as that of the 8th prince and the 5th prince. This was enough to change the minds of those who were still watching. Originally, there were still some people who were neutral, but now, almost all of them had secretly joined the 8th and 5th factions. As for the crown prince's people, there were not many left. At least everyone in the court knew that the title of the future crown prince of the great Jin dynasty would not fall on the crown prince. Now, it all depended on whether the 8th prince or the 5th prince was more capable. Sitting beside the empress, one was Wang Lian, and the other was Jiang Dan. Wang Lian, was dressed in a pink silk dress that tightened at the waist, making her fair skin look like goat's milk. She was beautiful, but there was a kind of gentleness and elegance in her gestures, as well as a faint scholarly aura. As the daughter of the Hanlin family, she was naturally a talented woman who lived up to her name. Now, she was the emperor's favorite flower. Jiang Dan was dressed in a jade-green dress. In terms of appearance, she was not as beautiful as Wang Lian, She did not look as gentle and generous as Wang Lian, but she had a fresh and lively feeling. Compared to people like Wang Lian, Jiang Dan was quite popular in the palace. Even the empress found it difficult to dislike her. She had a kind of naivety in the way she did things. She treated the servants in the palace well, and she would not take the initiative to fight for favor. Therefore, compared to Wang Lian, everyone in the palace liked her. Now, she often followed the emperor and occasionally said something to make the emperor laugh. The emperor also valued her very much. Mu Shiro did not come today. She had always been arrogant and cold. She never interacted with concubines in the palace. Concubine Xian was even more so. Ever since Imperial concubine Chen and concubine Shu were defeated, she spent her days in the palace pretending to be pure. It was because the battle between the 5th prince and the 8th prince was getting more and more intense that she had to retreat. She could not be arrogant because she was favored. The rest were the new and lower-ranked beauties. Among these beauties, there was no lack of lively and beautiful ones, but among the new beauties, there were only 3 who were favored the most. The empress looked slightly tired and said, "The weather is getting colder." It was indeed getting colder. It was winter, and the wind was stronger every day. Wang Lian, smiled and said, "Yes, but it is still warm in the capital. I heard that there are paper-sized snowflakes in the kingdom of Tianjin. It should be the coldest." The empress looked at Wang Lian. Wang Lian's words revealed that the emperor liked her very much. Otherwise, why would he tell Wang Lian about the border? Her expression turned cold and she said, "It is true. The soldiers are suffering in the cold outside. It is really hard." Her Majesty the Empress is right, Jiang Dan smiled. The great Jin dynasty's rivers and mountains need to be guarded by these soldiers. His Majesty's good fortune will last for a long time. Over at Tianjin, we will definitely be able to win a battle. When the soldiers return home, it will certainly be a glorious day. However, every time I think about how the soldiers are working so hard, I feel very ashamed of myself for being so extravagant. I am willing to donate some silver and jewelry in exchange for some rations and supplies to be transported to the border. I will do my part. Hearing Jiang Dan's words, the Empress was a little surprised. Then she looked at her with admiration. As the mother of the country, no matter what thoughts the Empress had about the court, she always hoped that the great Jin dynasty could continue to prosper. Naturally, she also hoped that the war with the kingdom of Tianjin would be fought beautifully. But everyone knew that this was not an easy task. Now that there was a shortage of rations, it was not easy for Jiang Dan to volunteer to donate some supplies. As a beauty in the palace, Jiang Dan naturally could not donate much. But once this news spread, the beauties in the palace followed suit, and so did the important officials of the court. Together, it would be a considerable amount of supplies. Moreover, Jiang Dan had instinctively mentioned this to the emperor, but she had mentioned it to the empress. This showed that she had no intention of competing for favor. This made the empress feel more at ease. The empress's expression toward Jiang Dan became even gentler. "It is rare that you are so considerate. I will mention this to His Majesty." Her words were obviously praising Jiang Dan. Jiang Dan smiled. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I can do nothing but make a small contribution." The surrounding beauties all looked at Jiang Dan with jealousy and envy. Wang Lian's expression changed slightly. A moment later, it returned to normal and she smiled as if nothing had happened. After the empress ordered the crowd to disperse, Jiang Dan returned to her courtyard. The maidservant beside her, handed her a letter and said softly, "Miss, there is a letter." Jiang Dan returned to her room and asked the palace maids to leave before opening the letter. When she saw the contents of the letter, she was stunned at first. Then, she quickly read through it. After putting down the letter, she thought for a while and suddenly smiled slowly. The supply troops would set off in about 3 days. Because Jiang Dan had volunteered to donate supplies, the beauties in the palace did not want to be outdone and donated their own jewelry. Even the women in the palace were so considerate, so the officials naturally had to follow suit. Everyone in the court more or less contributed a sum of money, which added up to a large sum. Now that the war had consumed a large amount of money from the national treasury, it also consumed a lot of rations. This temporarily alleviated the urgent problem of the shortage of rations. The emperor was very pleased and doted on Jiang Dan even more. Every day, Zhang Ji was busy gathering rations and planning the route. This war with Tianjin could not be underestimated, and everything had to be done without fail. On the 3rd day, when they were supposed to set off, a piece of news came out of the palace. It was that the leader of the supply troops, Zhang Ji, had abused his power and withheld all the rations, reducing them by more than half. This news came out of nowhere, but it shocked everyone in the court. If it was proven that the soldiers' rations had been withheld, not even 10 heads would be enough for Zhang Ji to chop off. However, this was no small matter. The emperor immediately sent someone to stop Zhang Ji and quickly summon him back to the capital. At that time, Zhang Jijing had just left the city with the supply troops and provisions. He did not expect that he would be captured by the imperial guards sent by the emperor on the way. This matter immediately spread throughout the court and almost everyone felt insecure. In a short period of time, the emperor gathered all the court officials to discuss their views on this matter. Xianli straightened his collar, his expression as leisurely as ever, and could even be said to be like a spring breeze. Jiang Chao stood to the side with his head bowed and said respectfully, "Your Highness, everything has been arranged. Enough news has been released to lure people into the trap. Once this matter comes out, not only will it increase His Majesty's trust in Your Highness, it will also suppress His Highness's side. This is just the beginning." Although Xianli was in a good mood, he did not show an expression of arrogance. No matter the time, he maintained a calm and forbearance. "Your Highness is wise," Jiang Chao said. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something and looked at Xianli. "This time, it is all thanks to Beauty Jiang who released the news. It looks like this cooperation was good. In the future, it will be much more convenient with her." The news had been spread by Jiang Dan. There were many women in the imperial harem, and it was easy to spread rumors. In addition, each person had a faction behind them. It looked like a harem, but in reality, it was more complicated and easier to use than the previous court. With a little guidance, the desired effect would be achieved. Jiang Dan was smart, had no one to rely on, and did things cleanly. No one would suspect her. Jiang Chao sighed. This subordinate originally thought that she was timid, but now it seems that this is not entirely the case. Your Highness is wise and has long predicted that she will cooperate with us. Xianli shook his head. Do not underestimate women. Women are very cunning. As long as they know how to use their bodies and beauty, they can easily do many things that men cannot. Jiang Dan is not a timid person. Her ambition is higher than the heavens. As for why she is willing to cooperate with us and agreed so readily, on one hand, it is because she understands that she needs to rely on our strength in the palace. On the other hand, Xian Li's gaze darkened. She and Jiang Wan have a grudge. A grudge? Jiang Chao was puzzled. In the Fu, she has never done anything to Jiang Wan. At the time, it was Jiang Ruan's mother who raised her. Where did this hatred come from? Xianli laughed coldly but did not answer. There were some things that Jiang Chao might not know, but he might be able to find out. How exactly did Zhao Mei die? When Xia Yan had first entered the Fu, she had been very careful and had used Jiang Dan's hand. When he had found out about this, Xianli himself had been astonished. After all, Jiang Dan had only been a child at that time, yet she had not hesitated to lay her hands on her own mother. However, from this point, it could be seen that Jiang Dan had been vicious and merciless from a very young age. If such an outstanding chess piece could not be used by him, it would be too much of a pity. He was afraid that Jiang Dan did not have a grudge. If he could make good use of the fact that Jiang Dan had poisoned Zhao Mei, it might be a great help in the future. It was just that he needed to carefully consider where this matter should be put to use. Jiang Chao was bold but not astute. He did not intend to tell Jiang Chao about this beforehand. When Jiang Chao saw the emperor, the crowd of civil and military officials had already been divided into two distinct factions. One faction insisted that Zhang Ji had misappropriated the army's provisions, while the other faction firmly believed that Zhang Ji had been wrongly accused. Everyone knew that Zhang Ji's eldest son, Zhang Ming, had been close friends with Xianli. So when Xianli walked in, everyone's gaze turned to him. Some were filled with righteous indignation, some were taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. But when it came to Xianli, it was only resisted by a gentle expression, as if nothing major in the world could shake his composure. Xianhua watched coldly as Xianli approached, a cold smile on his lips. Coincidentally, a court official was bowing and arguing, "Your Majesty, Zhang Ji considers everyone beneath him. For his own greed, he disregarded the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers, and even threw the great favor of the great Jin court to the back of his mind. This is truly a heinous crime. Minister Wang's words are incorrect. Official Zhang has been in charge of the military supply troops for many years. How could he have made such a mistake? He must have been incited by someone with ulterior motives. This official does not believe it," another official said. Incited? Official Zhang has been an official for so many years. To be incited by someone, it is only because he listened to slanderous rumors. Another voice said with a deeper meaning, "I heard that official Zhang's 3 sons are now growing up." In these words, the spearhead was pointed at Xianli, intentionally or unintentionally. These words were strange. Indeed, Zhang Ji currently did not lack fame or wealth. If someone had really promised him something to make him not hesitate to commit such a grave mistake, then the promise must have been very generous. Under the heavens, what kind of promise did people yearn for the most? Naturally, it was the promise of the emperor. And the relationship between Zhang Ji's sons and Xianli made people wonder if there was anything fishy going on. The emperor's gaze darkened as he looked at the court officials. It was just a matter of one Zhang Ji. To think that the factions in the court were so clearly divided. He actually did not know that the world now did not regard him, the emperor, as their master. Was it because he was old? If anything happened to him, he would not hesitate. Without waiting for his decree, the world would immediately change its master. Eunuch Li noticed the emperor's expression and sighed in his heart. The competition between the princes was becoming more and more intense. They could not even hide it. But who knew the emperor's thoughts, and that person? AI. Eunuch Li had a trace of doubt in his heart. Why was Zhang Ji's matter so abnormal today? Normally, before the truth came to light, these court officials who saw the wind should sit and watch the situation develop. They should not be in such a hurry to express their stance. They should wait for Zhang Ji's crime to be proven or if he was wrongly accused before they all began to speak. Today was really too strange. Naturally, they did not know that the reason these court officials had expressed their stance so early was because someone had already warned them. Everyone thought that the information they received was accurate. Now, they were arguing with reason because they were certain that the side they stood on would definitely be good. A trace of pride flashed across Xian Hua's face. Xian Li saw it and only found it funny. Xian Hua was too impatient. All these years, Xian Hua had relied on Consort Xian's guidance to safely stay in the palace and even reach his current position. His impatient personality had not changed at all. If it was in the past, this would definitely cause the emperor to feel suspicious. But since ancient times, emperors were often suspicious. The more the situation looked to be unfavorable to Xianli, the more the emperor would trust Xianli. Naturally, if something really happened to Zhang Ji, the first person to suspect who had ordered him to seduce him would naturally be Xianli. The more Xianli was at a disadvantage, the more people condemned him, and the more hesitant the emperor would be. Because Xianli looked too isolated and helpless. People always sympathized with the weak, and the emperor was the same. This was human nature. But a trace of doubt flashed across Xian Li's eyes. Was today's matter too smooth? It was so smooth that he had a strange feeling in his heart, as if it should not be like this. When he had Jiang Dan release the news, it had only been a fixed number of people. But the people who spoke today were not in the plan. It was true that these people had pushed his plan forward and even made it smoother. But it was too smooth, and it made people suspicious. Lao Ba, what do you think of this matter? The emperor finally asked. The gaze he looked at Xianli was like a sharp sword, as if Xianli said one wrong word, there would immediately be blood splattered on the spot. Justice is in the hearts of the people, Xianli said lightly. I believe that Father has already made a decision. I believe in Father, and I also believe in Father's officials. We only need to wait for the person who reported to present the results of the investigation, and we will know. He had already expressed his position with these words. He believed that Zhang Ji was innocent, but he had used the words, officials who believed in the emperor, and this was already very polite. The emperor's expression gradually eased. Xian Li's actions made people feel more at ease. Xian Hua saw this and the corner of his mouth rose. It was just a struggle before death. Today was the day Xian Li died. At this time, the captain of the soldiers who had been inspecting the army's provisions had already returned to report. He walked in with large strides and knelt down to report, replying to Your Majesty, we have investigated under orders. There is no shortage of provisions for the troops, and everything is in place. Xian Hua's smile froze. He heard Zhang Ji's angry voice from outside, Your Majesty, I have been wronged. Chapter 175. Zhang Ji staggered out from the group of guards. His clothes were crumpled, and his hair was messed up from being pushed around. His face was flushed red, as if he had suffered a great humiliation. As soon as he entered, he knelt down and kowtowed heavily to the emperor several times. Your Majesty, this old subject has been wronged. Zhang Ji had been an official in the court for many years and could be considered to have some weight. It was rare for him to be in such a sorry state. Even the emperor could not easily scold or beat him, otherwise, it would chill the hearts of the court officials. He said, "My beloved subject, please rise." Zhang Ji raised his head but was not in a hurry to stand. He only raised his head with an angry gaze, as if he would faint in the next second. After a pause, he said, "This old subject has never done anything shameful in his life. Now, someone insists on splashing dirty water on this old subject and tarnishing this old subject's reputation. This person's intentions are extremely sinister. Your Majesty, please give this old subject justice." The emperor let out a long sigh and his gaze suddenly turned to Xianhua. Xianhua's mouth was slightly open, as if he had not recovered from this sudden turn of events. Suddenly aware of the emperor's gaze, he raised his head and was instantly chilled by the coldness in the emperor's eyes. He stood where he was as if he had fallen into an ice cellar, not daring to move. Zhang Ji had been proven to be innocent. That batch of military provisions had not been reduced at all. Naturally, someone wanted to frame Zhang Ji. Zhang Ji had been an official his entire life and had a considerable amount of weight in the court. Anyone with a bit of brain would not target him. Then, it was time to target the people behind Zhang Ji. If Zhang Ji was framed, the first person to be implicated would be Xianli. Currently, the person in court who saw Xianli as a thorn in his side the most was naturally the fifth prince, Xianhua. The court officials who had just been adding insult to injury did not dare to say a word. The people of Xianhua's faction were as silent as cicadas in winter. No one understood what had happened. The news they had received was that Zhang Ji would be investigated for stealing military provisions today. But now, Zhang Ji was safe and sound. That news must have been wrong. How could they still dare to run into the blade? The courtiers of Xian Li's faction, on the other hand, all put on airs of watching a good show, unable to conceal the arrogance in their eyes. Xian Li sighed and comforted him gently, "Lord Zhang, you don't have to be sad. You've been an official for so many years and your character is fair. Father will definitely help you." Zhang Ji angrily said, "If it's just insulting this old official, then it's fine. But this commotion is clearly delaying the advance of the supply train troops. Every day that the army's provisions are not delivered to the frontier, the officers and soldiers will have to endure another day of bitter cold. It's clear that they have bad intentions and want to make things difficult for our great Jin dynasty's soldiers at the border." As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. Even the emperor, who was sitting on the 9-layer dragon throne, had a cold look in his eyes. Xianhua cried out in his heart. This was supposed to be a turbulent undercurrent between the princes, but with a single sentence from this old man, he brought up the matter of the border war. Everyone knew that the current war between the great Jin dynasty and the Tian Jin kingdom was the last thing to talk about. Although on the surface, the great Jin dynasty seemed to be reporting victory after victory because of the arrival of the embroidered uniform guards, but the dangers within were not known to outsiders. This was a knife hanging over the flowery palace of the great Jin dynasty, and no one was allowed to touch it. But now, Zhang Ji had clearly placed this knife in front of everyone, and had even drawn out the bloodstains on it. Since ancient times, emperors had always been suspicious. What would the emperor think? He would most likely think that he had the intention to bring disaster to the country. If one were to speculate further, there was even the possibility that he had colluded with the enemy. Without sufficient evidence, there was no way to convict him. That news had spread so mysteriously that even Xianhua could not determine the source of the news. The emperor could not find the messenger, so he would certainly be even more bewildered. He would think that Xianhua's ability was so great that even he could not control it. To the emperor, this was not a good sign. "My beloved subject, there is indeed something fishy about this matter. Don't worry, we will definitely give you an explanation." The emperor said heavily, the chill in his words causing everyone present to be shocked. No matter how bright the emperor looked on ordinary days, his natural majesty could not be violated. Today, the person behind him had played him like a monkey. If he was really found out, how could he have a good ending? He looked at Zhang Ji, who was kneeling on the ground in tears, and comforted him. We still need you, and the soldiers of the great Jin dynasty also need you. Today, we have made this trip in vain. We will definitely make that person pay the price. It is just that the situation at the border is tight. My beloved subject will have to make a trip to deal with the future matters. Now that it is late, we will depart tomorrow. My beloved subject, return to your residence today and rest well. We will draft an edict in a while. This was to appease Zhang Ji and seriously investigate this matter. The more Xian Hua listened, the worse he felt. But at this moment, if he spoke, it would only add fuel to the fire. He could only silently swallow his resentment, but his expression was unusually unsightly, as if he was about to fling his sleeves and leave. Since the emperor had already put down his arrogance, Zhang Ji had no reason to be pretentious. After repeatedly thanking the emperor for his kindness, the mighty storm over the army's pay slowly subsided. When Zhang Ji returned to his residence, he would naturally receive compensation from the palace. An old official being slandered was indeed a very unpleasant matter. On the surface, it looked like Zhang Ji had been wronged, but in reality, it did not hurt or itch. Instead, it made the emperor trust him even more. In the end, the one who had lost was only Xian Hua. At present, the emperor did not blame Xian Hua, but his every move today had fallen into the emperor's eyes. He would also think and have his own thoughts. Sometimes, to achieve a certain goal did not require sufficient evidence and certainty. As long as a seed of suspicion was quietly buried in the other person's heart, waiting for it to break through the soil and sprout, there would come a day when this seed would burst forth with incomparably great power. Today's matter was a seed buried in the emperor's heart. The emperor had grown suspicious of Xian Hua. From now on, whatever Xian Hua did, the emperor might not necessarily have no ulterior motives. From the very beginning, he had lost the initiative. Today's loser was Xian Hua, but the biggest winner was Xian Li. He did not do anything at all. He did not even appear, but he easily won the emperor's sympathy and trust. It also paved the way for the next step of his plan. When he slowly passed by Xian Hua, he smiled slightly. The gloomy gaze he looked at Xian Hua seemed to contain a trace of hidden contempt. Xian Hua clenched his fists tightly and controlled himself from punching. Behind Xian Li, there was a smiling gaze looking at him. This gaze came from the crowd of officials and did not attract much attention. It was a young man wearing a purple official robe. He had a small mustache and a meaningful gaze. When he retracted his gaze, he was surprised to find that there was also a person standing not far from him quietly watching Xian Li. That person had not yet grown up and was only a young child. He was born beautiful and delicate. His eyes were as bright as the best glazed stone. However, his gaze was cold and heavy. It was actually somewhat familiar. The child seemed to feel his gaze. He turned his head and stared at him coldly. When he turned around, the young eunuch on the side hurriedly greeted him. 13th Highness, please walk slowly. Qi Feng was slightly stunned. He turned his head and followed the child. Zhang Ji returned to the Fu. As expected, the emperor's imperial edict arrived. He was rewarded with some gold and silver as a consolation. After comforting everyone in the Fu, it was already late at night. Zhang Ji returned to the study and lit an oil lamp. He took out a box from under the study table and handed it to the person standing opposite him. That person had obviously been waiting in the study for a long time. Seeing Zhang Ji's actions, he smiled with satisfaction. Official Zhang is really agile. I will go and report to His Highness. In the future, when His Highness's great undertaking succeeds, official Zhang will definitely be remembered as the first-class merit. Zhang Ji smiled. Young Master Jiang is too kind. This old man is already half a foot in the ground. How can there be any glory, splendor, or wealth? On the other hand, young Master Jiang is a young hero. In the future, you will soar and become a legendary figure of the great Jin dynasty. The person in the study was none other than Jiang Chao. At this moment, he and Zhang Ji had reached a consensus by flattering each other. However, this alliance had come together because of interests. Sincerity and hypocrisy could be distinguished. Zhang Ji secretly cursed the fellow opposite him for being so vicious. He was even willing to be Xian Li's dog, shamelessly begging for food from Xian Li's hands. Jiang Chao also secretly despised Zhang Ji's nonchalant attitude. Wasn't it all for the sake of power? But no matter what he felt, he always wore a smile on his face. Zhang Ji looked at the small box in Jiang Chao's hands and said with a smile, "This is the key to the warehouse where the army's provisions are kept. There are a total of 800 carriages. Young Master Jiang must do things cleanly to avoid leaving behind any evidence." Naturally, Jiang Chao also smiled. This is an important part of His Highness's great undertaking. How can anything go wrong? Thank you, Lord Zhang, for giving me the key today. I wish Lord Zhang a safe journey tomorrow. Zhang Ji returned his smile. Thank you, young master. After the two had spoken, Jiang Chao left through the back door of the Zhangfu. It was currently the third watch of the night. The capital was dark and there was not a single star in the sky. Perhaps it was going to rain soon. Even the moon could not be seen. Dark clouds hung heavily in the sky. It was a night where one could not even see their own fingers in front of them. Jiang Chao rode his horse, hurrying all the way until he arrived at the back of a huge warehouse in the eastern part of the city. He saw that the warehouse was built so high that it was impossible to climb. It was at least half the height of the city wall. All the provisions that the army needed to transport were stored inside. The people outside had all arrived. Jiang Chao threw the key to the person standing at the very front. That person took the key and opened the door of the warehouse. As if they had received an order in unison, the people who had been silently waiting around moved in unison. They unloaded the goods from the other side's carriages. One side transported the goods from the warehouse, and the other side transported the goods from the warehouse. This was the act of stealing the beam and replacing the pillar. Jiang Chao looked on complacently until a person walked to his side and said, "Is everything ready?" Jiang Chao turned his head to look. Xia Jun was standing in the deep night, holding only a small torch. His eyes were reflected by the light of the fire, making him look somewhat strange. His expression froze. Everything is ready. Even the people in the surroundings who were in the way have been killed. Xia Jun nodded. He looked at the people going in and out of the huge warehouse, but his face did not reveal much joy. Jiang Chao noticed his expression and asked curiously, "Biaoti, what are you still worried about?" Xia Jun shook his head. A strange look appeared in his eyes. "I don't know why, but I have a feeling of unease. Everything had happened too smoothly." Whether it was the play that Zhang Ji had directed and acted on himself in the throne room, or the current act of stealing the beam and replacing the pillar in the warehouse, everything had happened too naturally and too smoothly. Suddenly, a pair of coquettish eyes appeared in his mind. That eyebrow slightly curved. It looked like a smile, but there was a deep sense of ridicule in his eyes. Xia Jun was startled. He felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over his head. He immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. After a while, he asked Jiang Chao, "Did Jiang Wan make any unusual movements?" "She stays in Jinying Wangfu all day and has never entered the palace." Jiang Chao smiled coldly. "Biaoti, you don't have to worry too much. She has never left the Fu. How could she know our plans? Could it be that she can predict the future?" Xia Jun's eyes flickered. "Yes, it is impossible for her to predict the future. As a person who lived in a Wangfu, news traveled slower than others. All the sources of information had to be obtained from outside. It was impossible for Jiang Wan to know what they wanted to do first. Early the next morning, this troops' provisions would be transported along with the military supply troops to the distant border. Moreover, this troops' provisions were not the usual troops' provisions. Everything was done in secret. By the time Jiang Yuan discovered that something was wrong, it would already be too late. For example, how would Jiang Yuan know that they were stealing the beam and replacing the pillar? How could she stop them? It was impossible for her to know of their plans. Unless she was not human, she could predict the future. Xia Jun slowly calmed down and said, "Let's continue, while the sky is not bright." While the sky was not bright, let everything be submerged in the night. And Jiang Yuan was destined to lose in this confrontation. Winner takes all and loser takes all. This was an unchanging principle since ancient times. That night, in Jining Wang Fu, the light in Xiao Xiao's study was not extinguished. From the outside, it looked like a cluster of bright and warm fireworks in the pitch-black night. It was as if one could open the door and see a cold and reserved youth dressed in black sitting in front of the desk. At this moment, there was indeed a person sitting in front of the desk, but it was a graceful young girl who had just matured. The fragrance of tea curled up in spirals and the rising mist separated the desk. Under the illumination of the lamp, a small beautiful flower bloomed. What was even more beautiful than the misty flower was the young girl's appearance. She was clearly wearing a moon-white long skirt with a dark purple cloak draped over her head. This made her face look as if it was carved out of fine white jade. Every stroke of her facial features seemed to have been carefully carved by the heavens. Every place was just right and beautiful. She exuded a kind of peerless charm from her bones. Every movement of this beauty was amorous, but her pair of charming eyes were cold and elegant, forcefully suppressing that kind of vulgar charm. She was like a mandala that bloomed under the moonlight, cold and enchanting. Jiang Yuan looked at the young man in purple in front of her. Even though Qi Feng had been obsessed with the politics of the court all his life, he could not help but be slightly absent-minded by this peerless beauty. There were beauties in the world, and it was rare for them to be beautiful and intelligent. If one's appearance was said to be a bag of skin, then this young girl's wisdom was to inject a vivid soul into this beautiful bag of skin, making it lively and fragrant. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. Today in the palace hall, it was all thanks to young Master Qi. Xianli and Zhang Ji had joined forces to sing this play, and from beginning to end, she had never thought of stopping them. Since Qi Feng was playing with the politics of the court, he naturally had another identity in the court. This identity looked unremarkable, neither too high nor too low, but it was the most subtle existence. If he wanted to do something in the court, it was the easiest way to hide his identity and not be detected. And Qi Feng also acted according to Jiang Yuan's instructions. In Zhang Ji's play, he pushed the boat with the current and made this play more smoothly. It was just that, in addition to his secret arrangements, it seemed that there was also another part of the power involved. So today, Zhang Ji's play was perfect. In fact, there was another person who contributed, but it was unknown what that person's purpose was and who did it. Suddenly, the face of the beautiful child in the palace hall flashed in Qi Feng's mind. His eyes slightly darkened, and he said, "They have already made their move." He raised the letter in his hand, and his gaze was profound. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, it would be hard to imagine that Xianli would take such a risk. Jiang Yuan unhurriedly picked up the cup of white tea in front of her and took a small sip. She then said in an indifferent voice, "Tonight, they cheated by replacing the beams with the pillars. That warehouse full of soldiers' pay was completely replaced with moldy rice grains and other supplies. Except for the outermost ones, the ones inside were all made up of straw. And with Zhang Ji's good play in the court today, there will be no more accidents tomorrow. Once the military provisions are safely transported out of the capital, the mountains will be high and the rivers will be long. And after the supply troops leave, the soldiers at the border will inevitably suffer. Without military provisions, sooner or later, they will run out of ammunition and food. When the whole army is wiped out, who will hold Zhang Ji accountable? Even if there are fish that escape the net, they can find ways to kill them one by one. It is indeed a good deal. Qi Feng took a deep breath and said, Xianli is a prince of the great Jin dynasty, but for his own selfishness, he disregarded the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers at the border and regarded the territory of the great Jin dynasty as a child's play. It is really insane. Jiang Yuan looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. Oh. Do you really think so? When Qi Feng was looked at by those eyes, he immediately felt that his thoughts could not be hidden. He had always been clever, but he did not know why he often felt a sense of defeat in front of this young girl who was not even older than him. He scratched his head awkwardly and said with a smile, "Third sister-in-law, I have something to ask you. What did you let Jin Air take the genie guards to do?" Before Xiao Xiao left, he had handed over all the genie guards in the capital to Jin Wan and Jin Air. Jin Wan and Jin Air were all under Jiang Ruan's command, which was equivalent to Xiao Xiao handing over all the genie guards in the capital to Jiang Ruan. For Qi Feng, this was a very inconceivable thing. First, although the genie guards were secret guards, each and every one of them was an elite and virtuous person. However, outstanding people were always proud and arrogant. For them to willingly submit to Jiang Ruan, it was not easy for Jin Wan and Jin Air to be the heads of the genie guards. But when they heard Jiang Ruan's order, they went out without saying anything. This was enough to show Jiang Ruan's position in their hearts. Secondly, Xiao Xiao was not a person who easily trusted others. In his early years, he was even more accustomed to being a loner. Yet, he had handed over his hidden strength to Jiang Ruan. It was clear that Jiang Ruan held a special place in his heart. Jiang Ruan suddenly smiled, "Master Qi, you are smart and far-sighted. Why do you still need to speak in riddles in front of me? You clearly know why Xianli wanted to exchange the army's provisions in the warehouse." Qi Feng was startled and looked at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan looked at him quietly. In the light of the fire, her smile was gentle and quiet, but her gaze was distant and deep, as if she was looking at the long years of the future through the fire. There was a clear understanding of the world in her gaze, as if she was a spectator who had watched the whole play and was watching it from the beginning again. She was just an outsider who was watching with cold eyes. No matter how the actors struggled and floated, she was always outside the world of mortals, clear-headed and cruel as she watched everything happen. He slowly shook his head and smiled bitterly, "Third sister-in-law, you are so smart that it is scary." "Yes, I know why. I have known for a long time that Xianli and Tianjin colluded. The intelligence of the genie guards is the best in the world. There is nothing that we do not know. Except for your secret," he added in his heart. "Yes, since Tianjin and Xianli have colluded, Xianli should at least show something. In other words, in this war, he must ensure that Tianjin will win. Such a large amount of military provisions will only be a hot potato in his hands. Xianli cannot leave these things in the capital. He can only think of a way to transport them out. And there is only one way to use this batch of provisions to the greatest extent and safely." Jiang Ruan said lightly. "Send it to Tianjin as the Tianjin army's provisions." Qi Feng continued her words. It was so easy to talk to a smart person. Jiang Ruan smiled, "Yes, but Xianli's method may not be good in my eyes. This method looks simple on the surface, but in fact, it requires a great price. It is because it is too dangerous that no one thought of it. Xianli did the opposite and can be considered an ambitious and ruthless person. Moreover, to think of a way to transport it out, there must be a foolproof plan." "I don't understand why you say it may not be good," Qi Feng said. He did not believe that Jiang Ruan, an unmarried woman, could compete with Xianli, who was born as a schemer. Even if she could guess people's minds, the matters of the imperial court could not be achieved by scheming and winning people's hearts. No matter what you do, you can't leave behind any evidence. Jiang Ruan's eyes were slightly cold. Xianli left behind this batch of provisions. It is precisely because of this that I have the opportunity to break out of this situation. If I were in his position, I would never leave behind this batch of provisions. Once the things are exchanged, I will immediately burn them, leaving no trace. Qi Feng looked at her dumbfounded. You burned it? He could not see the ridicule in Jiang Ruan's eyes. What she said was the truth. Today, if she and Xianli exchanged positions, she would really burn the entire batch of provisions. God, how could she have such courage? What did she eat growing up? Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Didn't you ask me what Jin Er and the others went to do? I will tell you now, they went to set the fire. Everything about Xianli's play is good, but it is a little lacking. But this is not up to him to decide. Qi Feng felt a chill in his heart and asked, set what fire? Do you still not understand? Jiang Ruan smiled gently. This time, I want them to beat their teeth out and swallow their blood. They will suffer a great loss, but they will not be able to say a word. Under the arrangements, the provisions in the warehouse had all been transferred to the place where they should be transferred. At this moment, in the warehouse of the eastern courtyard, someone closed the warehouse door and handed the key to Jiang Chao. The warehouse door was restored to its original appearance, as if it had never been opened. These things were restored to an excellent position, and everything looked no different from the day. Xia Jun stood beside Jiang Chao. He did not know why, but the uneasiness in his heart resurfaced, as if some subtle emotion was about to break through the soil. Jiang Chao looked at the scene in front of him with satisfaction and smiled. Now that everything has been settled, when I return and report to His Highness, I will certainly have made a great contribution. Once this matter was completed, Xianli's great cause would be half successful. In this world, some of the rivers and mountains would be his meritorious service. In the future, he would certainly have a meteoric rise and his future prospects would be immeasurable. It was not in vain that he had spent so much effort on this. Darren, now that the matter has been settled, should we go back first? The guard asked. Go back. The two words had not yet left his mouth when a dong sound was heard. Something fell from the sky and suddenly hit the roof of the warehouse. It rolled down the slanted roof and rolled in front of everyone. The guards were all startled and protected Jiang Chao as they retreated a few steps. Seeing that there was no reaction from the thing, they picked up their torches and boldly went forward to investigate. With one look, the guard was so frightened that he suddenly sat on the ground and dropped his torch. His lips trembled as he said, Darren, Darren. Jiang Chao saw that the guard's appearance was strange and went forward to take a look. With one look, he was also shocked. The person on the ground was not someone else but the leader of the military supply team, Zhang Ji. At this moment, his entire body was stiff and there was a line of blood on his throat. His eyes were wide open and it was obvious that he was already dead. Jiang Chao had only been separated from him for 4 hours and did not think that when they met again, Zhang Ji would already be a corpse. He could not help but turn pale with fright. Before he could react, he heard several whooshing sounds and several black shadows flashed across the sky. No one saw how the warehouse door opened and no one saw how the sparks were drawn in. They only saw the sparks coming into contact with the hay and shooting high up into the sky. There was no need to incite them and they quickly rose up like a line of fire. In a flash, the entire warehouse was enveloped in a sea of fire. The rumbling flames almost lit up the entire street, making it as bright as day. The flames were the color of blood and faintly contained a layer of ominous aura. No one had expected that there would be such an unforeseen event. Jiang Chao and Xia Jun were both stunned on the spot. Those black-clothed men came and went without a trace and immediately disappeared. Xia Jun's heart moved and was about to give the order to retreat when he heard someone shout, "There's a fire, not good, the warehouse is on fire." Immediately after, the sound of hooves could be heard coming from the far end of the street, accompanied by the light of the torches. A loud voice shouted, "Audacious madman, you dare to set fire to the army's provisions. Arrest him for this official. Chapter 176. In the darkest cell of the celestial prison, two cells were next to each other, separated by a thick iron fence. Not only did the weak firelight not bring a trace of light to the already gloomy cell, but it also made it seem even more eerie. Jiang Quan grabbed Xiaoyu. Did you hear me clearly? Only the Xia Fu's private army has nothing to do with the Jiang family. No, after thinking for a long time, Jiang Quan made up his mind and said, now is not a good time. Write a letter for me and send it to Jining Wang Fu. Tell Jiang Wan to quickly return to the Fu. Her second brother has met with such a big accident, she must think of a way to save his life. The fact that the Xia family's private army had been caught on the spot was already a fact that they could not escape. If things continued to develop smoothly, the emperor would also wipe out the Xia family. Now that his great undertaking had not been accomplished, he still needed to rely on the Xia family's strength. How could he easily abandon this most important chess piece? If the Xia family were to fall because of this, not only would it chill the officials who followed him, but it would also cause him to lose a large part of his own strength. The Xia family must be saved. Wait. Xia Jun said, wait until 8th Prince finds a reason to exchange all the rations that were exchanged and tells the emperor that we were burning moldy rations and not the army's provisions. Then, this matter will be easily resolved. Jiang Quan sat where he was, the expression in his eyes fluctuating uncertainly. If it had been in the past, he would certainly have thought of a way to rescue Jiang Chao without a second word. But now, the Jiang family was not what it used to be. Their reputation in the capital was already ruined, and the emperor was quite critical of the Jiang family. This time, Jiang Chao had made such a big mess. This matter was too big, and it was impossible for Jiang Chao to escape unscathed. What was even more worrying was the emperor's attitude. If he entered the palace to plead for Jiang Chao now, would the emperor think that the Jiang family had also participated in this matter? Originally, he had only suspected that the Xia family had the intention to rebel, but this would suddenly implicate the Jiang family. What should he do? Before coming to the Jiang Fu, Xia Yu had already heard of Jiang Ruan's deeds. Regarding the matter of Jiang Ruan rectifying the Xia family and Jiang Quan, she had actually applauded. Now, hearing Jiang Quan's words, he could not help but feel a trace of contempt in his heart. Why did Jiang Quan need to speak in such a dignified manner? He himself did not dare to step forward, yet he was instructing his daughter to step forward. Jiang Wan and Jiang Chao had never been on good terms, and Jiang Quan was well aware of this. How could Jiang Wan be so willing to help Jiang Chao get off the hook? He did not know whether Jiang Quan had become so muddle-headed because he was too anxious. If he loses the Xia family, he would only lose his right-hand man. If he saves the Xia family, he could end his great career. Jiang Wan said indifferently, Xian Li's temperament is excessively suspicious. With such an opportunity to save the Xia family, he will instead hesitate and think that we have dug a pit behind his back to invite him into the urn. The more hesitant he is, the more he will not dare to make a rash decision. Jiang Wan put down the weasel bristle brush in her hand. The elegant and beautiful hairpin-style small seal script in her hand was delicate and charming. The purple-clothed youth sitting opposite her could not help but ask, what if Xian Li thinks of a way to rescue him? The Xia family won't be able to lose anything, and they'll even hold a grudge against you. After going through so much trouble, this is the result. He had always been used to using political trickery to scheme against everyone. This was the first time that he had accepted other people's arrangements and manipulations. He did not even know every part of this plan, and only followed Jiang Ruan's instructions. However, he was still confused, and did not understand what exactly she wanted to do. She spoke so confidently and solemnly that even if Jiang Quan did not want to believe her, he could not do anything about it. He said angrily, this unfilial son. He will definitely destroy the Jiang family. Jiang Quan was restless. He felt a cold sweat slide down his neck to his back. The emperor's suspicions were like a knife hanging over the Jiangfu's head. But now, he only had this one son, so he could not ignore it. I hope so. Xia Jun looked at his own hands, but, he thought to himself, did Jiang Yuan really only manage to do this much? That woman was ruthless and merciless. If all of this had really been orchestrated by her, how could everything have been lifted up and dropped down so lightly? Just to let them suffer a little. The faint uneasiness in Xia Jun's heart once again emerged. He clenched his fists and no longer spoke. Jiang Chao shook his head, younger cousin, what you said is really too outrageous. If what you said is true, who is that person? Who has such great ability? On both sides of the iron fence, there were two people sitting against the wall. One was dejected and mournful, while the other had a gloomy and cold gaze, and his face was so gloomy that it could drip water. What method? Jiang Chao hurriedly asked. The fire burned for an entire night. That night, the common people of the great Jin dynasty slept soundly, not knowing how many undercurrents had occurred. No one knew how the granary had caught fire. It was not until the next morning when the peddlers went to open their shops that they saw the granary with billowing smoke. The original carriage and horses were in a mess, and the inside was overgrown with ashes. It was obvious that there was no longer any good provisions left. But that is only a suspicion, he would not even dare to probe. Although Qi Feng was surprised by Jiang Ruan's familiarity with Xian Li's thoughts, he still insisted. The advisor was somewhat worried and asked, Your Highness, by doing this, do you intend to disregard the life and death of Xia Jun and the Xia family? But, how did they know about our plan to secretly exchange provisions? Jiang Chao was surprised that there was actually someone who was like the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. However, there were only 5 people who knew about this plan, so where did the news leak out? That person had mixed in with the private army and provoked the conflict between the Xia Fu's private army and the soldiers led by the city's garrison. Thus, he had obtained the reputation of the Xia Fu's arson and had committed treason. This crime of arson, coupled with the crime of rebelling against one's superiors, was really a heinous crime. It could be said that the heart of rebellion was clear. Xian Li sneered, if I really did this, I would be playing right into someone else's hands. You can say that Xia Jun did it to protect the army's provisions, but others may not necessarily say that Xia Jun wanted to exchange provisions to line his own pockets. From what I see, the person behind this, perhaps by the time I think of a way to explain to Imperial Father, he will have other evidence to confirm the crime of Xia Jun exchanging provisions. At that time, Imperial Father will definitely be furious and blame me as well. Moreover, he thought of something, but did not finish his words. We have fallen into a trap. After a long while, Xia Jun slowly said, this was a trap set up against us from the very beginning. The other party knew what we were going to do all along and just gave us a push. Now, it's time to pull in the net. Do you know what the scariest part is? Xia Jun sneered and said, we burned the provisions in the middle of the night, and if we are not careful, we will be accused of treason. The provisions were used to alleviate the urgent situation at the border, and now they have all been burned. We have no way of compensating them. Right now, there is only one way. In the 8th prince's residence, the advisor quietly retreated to the side, not daring to say a word. What should have been a foolproof plan had somehow run into trouble at this critical juncture, especially when they had been caught red-handed by someone. The garrison was also famous for being upright and outspoken, so there was almost no chance for them to cry out their grievances. The moldy old provisions could not be transported to the border, so this part was lost. It was equivalent to losing everything. Jiang Chao looked at Xia Jun, unable to conceal the anxiety in his heart. Cousin, what should we do now? Is it very strange? I also feel that it is very strange. It doesn't seem like they knew that we were going to set fire to the grain. Instead, it seems like they knew what we were going to do from the beginning and even pushed us along. Now that I think about it, the show that Zhang Ji put on that day was too perfect. I think that at that time, we had already fallen into someone else's trap without even knowing it, Xia Jun said. Last night, the fire in the granary came out of nowhere. It was clear that someone had purposely set it on fire to push the blame onto us. When the garrison came with their troops, I had clearly given the order that the private troops were not to fight impulsively, but there were people who took the initiative to draw their blades. Now that I think about it, it is too suspicious. It was clearly someone mixed in and purposely stirred up trouble. Seeing that Xianli did not speak, the advisor continued, right now, we can only think of a way to transport the provisions back and find a way to say that Xia Jun and Jiang Chao were burning the old provisions to protect the provisions. As long as we round up the matter and do it cleanly, it is not impossible. Your Imperial Highness, should we think of a way to rescue Xia Jun and Jiang Chao? The advisor opened his mouth. This matter also involves the Xia family. If we sit back and do nothing, His Imperial Majesty will certainly punish the Xia family heavily. The Xia family is still useful to your Imperial Highness, we cannot abandon them so easily. Xia Jun was startled and secretly cursed in his heart. However, without waiting for him to speak, he heard someone among his own troops draw his sword. He shouted, "Put down your sword." However, that person acted as if he did not hear him and continued to slash and kill. When Jiang Quan heard this, he almost fainted. It was not a big deal for high-ranking officials in the capital to have a private army in their manors. This private army was no different from the guards in the manors. There were not many of them and the emperor had also tacitly approved of it. However, the crime of two people arson and a private army arson was very different. If it was just one person arson, it could be said that it was Xia Jun and Jiang Chao's own idea. However, once there was a private army, it would implicate the entire manors. Especially when this private army was fighting with the garrison. Wouldn't that be clamoring at the feet of the emperor? What would the emperor think? He would certainly think that they had long had the intention to rebel. Xianli was startled and seemed to realize something. His gaze darkened and he said, "No." The news that the second young master of the Jiang Fu, Jiang Chao, and the second young master of the Xia Fu, Xia Jun, had set fire to the granary in the middle of the night had spread throughout the capital on the first day. When Jiang Quan heard this news in the Fu, his hands trembled and he almost overturned his teacup. He stared incredulously at his new wife, Xia Yu, beside him. "What did you say?" Jiang Chao looked at him in shock, his mind becoming increasingly confused. "Younger cousin, what do you mean? They and I have long been mortal enemies. Isn't it superfluous to talk about hatred?" Jiang Wan unhurriedly lifted the Xian paper and hung it out to dry. She asked, "Why did Xianli save him?" Jiang Quan was startled. Just now, his head had been spinning and he had only cared about Jiang Chao's audacity. But now, he truly felt a lingering fear. Indeed, 100,000 officers and soldiers were still waiting at the border for emergency provisions, but Jiang Chao and Xia Jun had set fire to the granary last night. In the dead of night, if one were to say that it was intentional, no one would believe it. If one were to say that it was intentional, then why would a proper son of an official's family do such a thing? Currently, the war between Jin and the Great Jin dynasty was the most sensitive area of the emperor's nerves. Jiang Chao stirring up trouble at this time was not to force the emperor to think in that direction, but to think that Jiang Chao had colluded with the enemy and committed treason. Otherwise, why would he rather destroy the granary and put the soldiers of the Great Jin dynasty in danger of running out of ammunition and provisions? Xia Yu looked at Jiang Quan somewhat timidly. She was merely the daughter of a distant cousin of the Xia Fu. Originally, she also had her own childhood sweetheart. However, in order to rope in the Jiang Fu and prevent the relationship between the Jiang and Xia Fu from being severed after Xia Yan's death, the Xia family had married her over. Currently, Xia Yu was only 17 or 18 years old, which was the age of a flower. Marrying Jiang Quan would allow her to be a person like her father, so naturally, she was resentful. Not long after marrying over, such a thing had happened in the Jiangfu. Xia Yu's heart was filled with even more resentment. However, one had no choice but to lower one's head under the eaves. On the surface, Jiang Quan looked gentle, but when he was angry, it was terrifying. She said, "Laoi, this is true. It has already spread outside." Naturally, he wouldn't dare. Jiang Wan suddenly laughed and turned to look at Qi Feng. Her eyes were beautiful and full of deep meaning. "Do you know where the 800 carriages of troops' provisions are now?" Jiang Wan looked at Qi Feng and suddenly smiled. "Is that so, young Master Qi? How about we make a bet? Abandon the army to protect the general." A trace of cruelty flashed across Xian Li's face. "Now, I have no other choice." "Who?" A charming and gorgeous face appeared before Xia Jun's eyes. That upturned coquettish eyes were slightly curved, as if mocking them for thinking themselves clever. Was it her? Although it was too inconceivable, Xia Jun had a hunch that this matter definitely had something to do with her. There was no such thing as a prophet in this world, so how did she know about their plans? It was as if she had completely seen through their thoughts. This was really too frightening. She even let Zhao Yi, who was on duty, avoid last night's search. Last night, it was another old official who had caught their city guard. The great Jin dynasty was famous for being incorruptible and impartial. If it was Zhao Yi, perhaps the emperor would suspect that it was because of the grudge between the Zhao and Xia families. But if it was that old official, he almost completely abandoned this possibility. Jiang Wan had even thought of this point. They simply had no chance to reverse the situation. "What else can we do?" Xia Jun sneered. "We are meat on the chopping block." He suddenly asked Xia Yu, "Why does Marquis Xia want to enter the palace?" Although Xia Cheng only had this one grandson, Xia Jun, he should not enter the palace so quickly to meet the emperor. Before everything was clear, Xia Cheng could not act blindly without thinking. Now that he was in a hurry to meet the emperor, something important must have happened. If the Xia family falls, it will not be of any benefit to Xian Li. His great cause still needs to rely on the Xia family's support. If the Xia family is hurt this time, it is tantamount to cutting off his right arm. How can he be willing? Jiang Chao saw Xia Jun's indifferent appearance and became even more anxious. How did things become like this? Where did we go wrong? What the hell, why would the city guard rush over at this time? Xia Yu's heart was filled with even more disdain. Even at this time, Jiang Quan still wholeheartedly thought of himself, afraid of implicating the Jiangfu. He was really selfish enough. But on second thought, the relationship between the Xia Fu and the Jiangfu was maintained through marriage. After Xia Yan's death, she had married herself over. They were originally together for the sake of mutual benefit. What kinship was there? Xia Yu glanced at Jiang Quan and said in a low voice, "I heard that yesterday, when second young Master Xia appeared, he also brought along the Xia family's private army. Those soldiers fought with the city guard." When His Majesty heard about it, he was extremely angry and threw second young Master Xia and second young Master Xia into prison. At this moment, the expression on Xian Li's face was very ugly. Even though he had people under him everywhere, he still could not figure out why the city guard would suddenly lead troops over. Even more, he did not understand where the flaw in the plan had been that allowed people to take advantage of it. Now that things had developed beyond his expectations, he did not even know how to pull the net. How could this be? Qi Feng was surprised. Xia Jun lowered his head and his eyes flashed. Since last night, he had had an ominous premonition. Now that it had finally been confirmed, he felt that everything had gone too smoothly, so smoothly that it made people suspicious. Jiang Wan had not obstructed it, which was really inexcusable. Now he finally understood where that inexplicable premonition had come from. It was because, since 3 years ago, when he had schemed against Jiang Wan, as long as it was related to Jiang Wan, she had never lost. She would not lose, so how could they have won so easily? All of this was just part of her calculations. Master, don't be so angry, Xia Yu looked down on Jiang Quan from the bottom of her heart. He only knew how to blame the heavens and blame others when something went wrong. Concealing the disdain in her eyes, she said, I heard that the Marquis has already entered the palace to meet the Emperor. This matter is no small matter. Burning the provisions in the granary is a serious crime. Now that the second young master has made such a move, it is hard to avoid suspicion. The mood of killing and brandishing one's sword was contagious. Like a signal, the people around him brandished their swords one after another and joined in the carnage. The crowd was in chaos, and for a moment, only the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. The official sitting high on the horse was alarmed and angry when he saw this scene. He shouted, Everyone, listen to my orders. Arrest these arsonists. If they resist, execute them on the spot. Let's bet that Xian Li will definitely not save the Xia family, Jiang Wan said. As soon as these words came out, the troops brought by Jiang Chao were even more panicked. Disregarding Xia Jun's attempts to stop them, they resisted with all their might. However, with so many people acting at night, how could they compare to the imperial guards patrolling in the imperial court? In less than the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the troops brought by Jiang Chao had been almost completely subdued. The ground was a mess. The fire in the granary was unstoppable. At this moment, even if there was a steady flow of water to put out the fire, it was tantamount to using a cup of water to put out a burning cart of firewood. They could only watch helplessly as the fire engulfed the entire granary and hundreds of carriages of provisions were reduced to ashes. What bet? Qi Feng was slightly startled by her actions. That's good. Jiang Chao breathed a sigh of relief. The eighth prince still needs the two of us. The Jiang family and the Xia family cannot be lost. Naturally, he will not sit idly by. The advisor looked at him in surprise. Chapter 177. However, Xia Jun and Jiang Chao were burning old rations, so where did the army's provisions go? With so many pairs of eyes watching, it was impossible to transport the army's provisions intact. Once Xian Li's secret passage was exposed, the emperor would be aware of his intention to rebel and would inevitably suppress him vigorously. Therefore, Xian Li's great cause would come to an end. He could not help, and even had to avoid arousing suspicion and protect the secret passage. This was destined to sacrifice the Xia family, and the Xia family's power was exactly what he needed. In this way, at least Xian Li's efforts over the past few years would go up in smoke. Qi Feng simply wanted to laugh. Jiang Ruan's move was really too ruthless. It was difficult for Xian Li to advance or retreat. In the end, he had to cut off a piece of raw flesh from his body. Then what should we do now? Find a way to inform His Majesty of Xian Li's secret passage? Qi Feng asked. If we say it now, Xian Li will have 100 ways to prove that the secret passage has nothing to do with him. Moreover, if His Majesty finds out, it will inevitably implicate Jinying Wang Fu. Jinying Wang Fu's position in the court is already awkward. If they are involved in this matter, there will be 100 disadvantages and no advantages. Jiang Yuan said, the most important thing is. Then what should we do? When Qi Feng saw that she unquestionably rejected this suggestion, he knew that she must have other ideas in her mind. He asked, Third sister-in-law, do you have a good idea? I said that this time, I want them to swallow their blood and teeth. Even if they suffer a great loss, they will not dare to say it. A trace of hostility flashed in her eyes. Xiao Xiao still needs the 800 carriages of army provisions. I also want to thank Xian Li for transporting them intact. I want this batch of provisions. You. Qi Feng looked at her in surprise. After a long while, he suddenly burst into laughter. His laughter was extremely carefree. As he laughed, he said, "Third sister-in-law, your temperament is really happy. You are also bold and your idea is even better. If this matter succeeds, if I were Xianli, I would definitely be so angry that I would be bedridden. You are really brilliant." Jiang Yuan declined to comment. At this moment, Lu Zhu pushed open the door and walked in. Seeing that Qi Feng was also there, she bowed and came forward to hand over a letter. She whispered, "Miss, Master has sent a letter." Jiang Yuan took the letter and did not care that Qi Feng was present. She took out the letter and finished reading it in a short time. After reading it, she did not have any emotions and handed the letter to Lu Zhu, "Take it out and burn it." Lu Zhu went out as she was told. Qi Feng looked at her and asked, "What happened to third sister-in-law?" "It's nothing. It's just that father feels that second brother is in prison. As a younger sister, I should do my part to save him." Her words were full of sarcasm. When Qi Feng heard this, he felt that it was harsh. He couldn't help but say, "What kind of logic is this? As a father, even if he wants to help Jiang Chao, you shouldn't be the one to do it. You're just a lady, why are you involved in this? Has Jiang Quan gone mad? He's just a little naive." Jiang Yuan sneered, "Save him. I just want to watch him take one step at a time until he can no longer turn back. He has lived long enough. This time, I want his life." In Nanhua Yuan, the emperor waved his hand, and the eunuchs who were about to speak fell silent. Eunuch Li drove them all out. The emperor stepped through the door and saw the youth who was practicing calligraphy in the room. It was too early to say that he was a youth. He looked more like a child. He was born with a delicate appearance, and it seemed that every time he saw him, he was more stable and reserved than before. The emperor softened his footsteps. When he got closer, he saw the words written on the child's snow-white xian paper, "Those who love desire are like holding a torch. If they walk against the wind, their hands will be burned." His handwriting was excellent. It was as delicate as others, and there was not the slightest sharpness. However, this did not mean that the youth was really as harmless as his handwriting. In fact, everyone had a temper. When they were still young, they could judge a person by their handwriting. However, in this youth's handwriting, his heart could not be seen clearly. The emperor looked around and recalled Eunuch Li's report. The side palace hall that Xian Pei lived in was the most remote hall in the palace. It could not even compare to the private residence of a seventh-ranked official. Later, he vacated Nanhua Yuan, where the fourth prince had lived, for Xian Pei. The fourth prince had also been favored by the emperor. If not for the accident that happened later on, it was unknown what the situation would be like now. The emperor's action immediately aroused speculation among the court officials. Those with a bit of insight began to inquire about this 13th prince, who seemed to have no backing. Although he had the emperor's favor, Xian Pei did not have a strong maternal family, so people in the palace did not think highly of him. Even so, seeing that Nanhua Yuan was well organized and well arranged, and not extravagant, one could tell that Xian Pei was a person with means and ideas. The emperor looked at this child that he did not value, and a complicated feeling suddenly arose in his heart. Xian Pei seemed to sense his arrival and turned to look. After a slight shock, he saluted, "This son greets imperial father. Dispense with the formalities." The emperor waved his hand. "We have come to see you." It was difficult to hide the weariness between his brows. Such a big thing had happened in the capital. Jiang Chao and Xia Jun had burned down the granary, almost angering the people of the world. He could not restrain his anger. What was even more infuriating was the Xia family's contempt for imperial power. The Xia family's private army had dared to attack the army led by the garrison. Xia Cheng had pleaded for mercy, but he had been thrown into prison. Although his actions seemed rash, the Xia family had already incurred the wrath of the world. If he did not capture them, it would be difficult to quell the resentment of the world. Moreover, the country was still the Xian family's country. When was it the Xia family's turn to point fingers? As the emperor, he had to let the world know that if he wanted to crush the Xia family, it would be as easy as crushing an ant. It was not that he did not know that the Xia family had been stirring in the dark for so many years. He had turned a blind eye because he did not want to break the balance. Now, it seemed that some things could not be tolerated. Since the Xia family had proactively exposed this layer of skin, naturally, he had to suppress them with all his strength. Dealing with the Xia family was not enough to worry the emperor. What worried him was how to pay the army. The war had already strained the national treasury. The last time they had collected grain from the people was not long ago. Now that they had to do it again, how could they appease the people? Thinking of this, the emperor slowly furrowed his brows. Seeing this, Xian Pei thought for a moment. Is Imperial Father worried about the granary? The emperor suddenly looked at Xian Pei. His son's intuition was sometimes too sharp, especially now that he was only 8 or 9 years old. Why did he feel like he was facing a grown man? Slowly, he said, 13, what do you think about this matter? The Xia family has been disrespectful to the court. They have committed a crime and will be punished by Imperial Father. Xian Pei gently avoided this topic and said, in my opinion, the most important thing now is not to punish the Xia family or punish them. Instead, it is the problem of food for the soldiers at the borders. If there were any suspicions that he and the Xia family had some kind of plan, Xian Pei's words were enough to dispel all doubts. He did not mention punishing the Xia family, but instead brought up the matter of the army's pay. In one's position, one would naturally pay attention to matters in that area when considering benefits. For example, when Xian Hua learned of this matter, he wrote a memorial that listed all the crimes of the Xia family. He did not think at all about the urgency of the war. Xian Pei could put aside his own interests and think of this point. Perhaps it was because he was still young, or perhaps he really did not care about politics. The emperor's gaze softened and his tone softened. It was as if a father from a normal family was treating his son and had the intention of testing his son's homework. He said, yes, the army's pay at the borders has all been turned to ashes, but the soldiers have to eat rations. What do you think? In order to protect Imperial Father's country, the soldiers of the great Jin dynasty shed their blood and laid down their lives, yet they are being played by their own people. The Xia family has let them down, but the Imperial family cannot let them down. Otherwise, who will work for Imperial Father in the future? Who will protect this country? Xian Pei's tone still carried a trace of childishness, but his gaze was incomparably calm. But now, the frequent confiscation of rations does not care about the lives of the common people. Disregarding the will of the people, it will cause unrest among the people. But the national treasury is temporarily unable to produce this amount of money and rations, so we can only act in other ways. Xian Pei raised his head to look at the emperor. His eyes were naturally beautiful. At this moment, perhaps he had thought of a good idea. His pair of eyes sparkled, melting the hearts of those who looked at him. He was like a child presenting a treasure. He smiled and said, in my opinion, Imperial Father can confiscate the Xia family. The Xia family has been in the great Jin dynasty for so many years, they must have saved up a lot of money. Take out all the money in the Xia family, find a rich merchant to buy rations, purchase a new batch of rations, and transport them over. As for the Xia family, they have been officials in the court for many years. Imperial Father can, on account of their feelings, spare them from their death sentence and change it to exile. This gives them a chance to atone for their crimes, and on the other hand, it can demonstrate the benevolence of the royal family. What does Imperial Father think? The emperor was silent for a while, not saying anything, but he still concealed a trace of deep meaning in his eyes. He had also thought of Xian Pei's idea before, but he could not make up his mind at the moment. Now, Xian Pei's words made him make up his mind. But, he looked at Xian Pei. Xian Pei looked at him with hope, like a good son waiting for his father's praise. He slowly reached out a hand to touch Xian Pei's head. Xian Pei's body stiffened, as if he was not used to such intimate contact. In the end, he stood without moving. The emperor sighed and said, "What you said is very good. I think this idea is not bad." The Xia family's influence in the court was too extensive. Capturing them all in one fell swoop would indeed alert the enemy and cause unnecessary trouble. Xian Pei's idea was very desirable. It could demonstrate the benevolence of the royal family and not alert the other henchmen. It could also give the Xia family a feeling that they did not need to be too pressured. The Xia family had amassed countless fortunes over the years, so they could raise a sum of money for the army. The emperor was surprised at Xian Pei's sensitivity to politics at such a young age. Although his idea for this matter was not perfect and had some loopholes, the general direction was not wrong. For a child, this was very good. He said a few more things to Xian Pei before hurriedly leaving. After the emperor left, Xian Pei stretched lazily and looked at the words on the table for a while before ordering a young eunuch to the side to take the paper and throw it away. He sat down on a chair, played with the paperweight in his hand, and smiled slightly. The Xia family had reached its end. The matter of the granary being set on fire raised a great wave in the court in Jing. However, before the officials could discuss it, the emperor's edict came suddenly. First, he sent the eldest grandson of the Zhao family, Zhao Yi, to lead troops to confiscate the Xia manor. The Xia manor's endless silver was put into the national treasury to prepare new provisions. All 183 members of the Xia residence were exiled. Jiang Chao, like Xia Jun, was also exiled to a desolate place in the northwest. Although the emperor's edict was swift and decisive, it did not put the Xia family to death. At least in the eyes of the common people, the royal family was merciful. However, the officials sensed a certain meaning from the emperor's action, and for a while, they did not dare to act rashly. When Jiang Yuan heard the news, she was drinking tea in the room. When she heard the news, she was slightly stunned and whispered to herself, "How can it be so fast?" As soon as her voice fell, she saw Qi Feng hurriedly walking in from outside. Recently, in order to deal with the Xia family, he often came here to discuss ideas with Jiang Yuan. Today, his expression was somewhat serious, but there was also a bit of joy in the seriousness. He said, "Third sister-in-law, it's done. This time, it's been hard on you." Jiang Yuan smiled, "With your help, things can be so smooth. I was about to talk to you about this." Qi Feng whispered, looked around, and shook his head, "I haven't had time to do this yet. It's not me who told the emperor. My people haven't started the plan yet. The one who prompted the emperor to issue the imperial edict is someone else." Jiang Yuan frowned, "Who is it?" "His 13th Highness." Qi Feng was also very strange. "I heard that day, the emperor went to his 13th Highness side hall to sit for a while. After he came out, he went to the imperial study to draft the edict. I think he must have heard something from his 13th Highness and made this decision." The teacup in Jiang Yuan's hand trembled, and a large drop of tea splashed out. Qi Feng was shocked by her action and said, "What's wrong, third sister-in-law?" Jiang Yuan lowered her eyes. Why would Xian Pei suddenly do such a thing? Today, according to his previous life, he was just a child who didn't understand anything. But since the last time she saw him in the palace, she felt a little strange. Now, he could even influence the emperor's actions. She had deliberately ignored the news of Xian Pei, so as not to bring trouble to Xian Pei. Now that she thought about it, it was very strange. It seemed that she had unknowingly missed something very important. A bold guess came to her mind. Could it be, Xian Pei could almost communicate with her telepathically, and even this time, he naturally pushed the boat with the current and gave the Xia family a fatal blow. If it was because of that reason, everything was not impossible. Qi Feng looked at her carefully, not letting go of any expression on her face. But after a moment, Jiang Wan raised her head and smiled, no matter what, we have achieved our goal. Qi Feng was very regretful that he could not find out Jiang Ruan's thoughts, but he also knew that the girl in front of him never showed her emotions, so he felt relieved and said, yes, I think this time the Xia family will not be able to escape. Lien Qiao, who was sitting on the side sewing, heard this and asked curiously, Miss, what do you mean? His Majesty did not sentence the Xia family to death, which is clearly letting them off easy. When she heard this news, Lien Qiao was still very indignant. In her opinion, the Xia family wanted to exchange the army's pay and framed the genie guards. It was a heinous crime. Even death 10 times was not enough. They did not take action because they did not leave any traces. Qi Feng smiled and explained for Jiang Wan, don't worry, we don't need to do anything. Naturally, there will be people who want the Xia family's life. The Xia family had been officials in the court for so many years. Although they were very involved, they had also formed many old enemies. For example, the fifth prince's people hated them to the point that their teeth itched. Moreover, the journey to the northwest was very long. How to safely reach the desolate northwest had become a difficult problem. They were confident that in less than 3 days, the Xia family would die suddenly. Chapter 178. From then on, where would the money to win over the officials come from? Xianli wanted to protect the secret passage and did not dare to let the secret of the secret passage leak out. Naturally, he had to sacrifice the Xia family and Jiang Chao. But the Xia family and Jiang Chao had worked under Xianli for so many years, they more or less knew what Xianli wanted to do. Xianli wanted to silence them, so how could he allow the Xia family to live? Jiang Wan said, presumably, the Xia family believed that the result of being exiled was Xianli's idea. They thought that one day, they would make a comeback, so they obediently did not resist. In the end, they sent themselves onto a dead end. You guessed wrong this time. Qi Feng laughed. It was not done by an enemy of the Xia family. The people of Nanjiang gave me a muscle-weakening powder, so I could not use my martial arts. After you came, the amount of muscle-weakening powder decreased, and my martial arts slowly recovered. You did this on purpose. Who are you? Jiang Xing stared at her without blinking. He guessed that Jean was not an ordinary person, but he had no clue who she was. Looking at her appearance, she did not look like an enemy, but was she one of their own? But she looked a little strange. I. Jean was oppressed by Jiang Xing's questioning gaze, and her face gradually turned red. She stammered, I am Wan Mimi's friend. I came to save you. Yuan Chuan, the man in the grey cloak, stood quietly at a distance from the bonfire, but his gaze was somewhat gloomy. A soldier on the side raised a cup of wine to toast him. Military advisor, this great victory was all thanks to your protection. Here's to you. How could there be a servant who did not even know how to clean the dishes, and did not even know how to serve the dishes? They did not even know the rules and etiquette. Mending and cleaning were a mess. For example, at this moment, the entire tent was covered in dust. Military pay, the guard's voice was almost crying. Military pay is gone. Every now and then, Yuan Chuan would capture Jiang Xing and interrogate him. The process of the interrogation was unbearable. When he came back, he was covered in wounds. Jean looked at him with tears in her eyes. Her distressed look did not seem to be an act. After a while, Jiang Xing also felt that Jean did not look like the enemy's spy. Jean and Jean San both looked at Lu Zhu. Lu Zhu noticed their expressions and took a step back, saying, Why are you all looking at me? I am Mrs. Servant, not a roundworm in Mrs. Stomach. Thinking about it, she continued, Moreover, Miss is now genieing Wangfei, your master. What is there to doubt? Ever since Jean came, Jiang Xing's meals would often have a few more dishes. Naturally, that was Jean Er's good intentions. Although it was not necessary, Jean was very persistent about adding more dishes for him. She insisted on watching him eat all of her extra snacks. The advisor saw that Xian Li's expression was fluctuating and becoming more and more gloomy. He hurriedly comforted him, "Your Highness need not worry too much. No matter how remarkable that person is, at least we still have the 800 carriages of military pay. As long as there is this military pay, your Highness will not lose." With Xian Li's temperament, if he knew that the military pay had disappeared for no reason, he would definitely fly into a rage. This matter was very strange, but with the methods of the genie guards, Xian Li would not be able to find this place in a short period of time. In this way, Xian Li would be immersed in this matter every day. Moreover, with his suspicious temperament, he would inevitably suspect that his secret passage had already been discovered. This was the true meaning of killing without spilling blood. To let a person immerse in fear every day, no matter how tenacious that person's heart was also a kind of torture. This person had always put on a calm and wise appearance. It was rare to encounter such childish words. Jiang Wan could not help but find it a little funny, and the corners of her lips slightly raised. Her usual smile was always a little cold, and it did not reach the bottom of her eyes. Under such a relaxed smile, her eyes were slightly curved, and the raised corners of her eyes were slightly lowered. It was a different kind of bright and beautiful color. Qi Feng could not help but stare blankly, as if his heart was touched by something. Then, he quickly lowered his head and said somewhat evasively, "In that case, this matter is also considered settled. Third sister-in-law, I still have some things to do, so I will take my leave first." After saying this, he hurriedly left. At the border thousands of miles away, everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. It seemed that they were completely unaware that such a thing had happened in the capital. However, at this moment, it was very lively outside the tent. The light from the burning bonfire illuminated everyone's face. A group of soldiers were cheering and enjoying themselves. From time to time, there were beautiful foreign women dressed in skimpy clothes singing and dancing. What do you know? Xian Li's face was as gloomy as water. "It's just a Xia family, I am not so depressed. What I am angry about is that after so long, the person behind this has yet to be found. A bunch of useless people." He spoke a little hurriedly, and his tone was a little breathless. The aides looked at each other and did not dare to breathe loudly. So today, these soldiers were here to celebrate. They were singing and drinking, and they were confident that victory was in their hands. Most probably, they did not know whether the war should continue or not. After all, the 100,000 genie guards would eventually become their prisoners, just like the people in the big tent now. When Du Pearl heard these two people say so, she immediately showed a proud smile and straightened her chest. "Of course, my miss is the best. Although it can't be said that everything is in the palm of the hand, at least if she wants to do something, she will certainly be able to do it. My miss is not only smart, she is also born beautiful. Looking at the capital, who can compare to my miss? Whoever marries my miss will really have picked up a treasure. Deputy General Jiang, I am your maid, this is what I should do." The young girl Jean Eyre returned a smile. These days, she seemed to play the role of a personal maid very well, as long as she did not look at those lame loopholes. "Your Highness, please calm down." Seeing their master like this, a group of aides stepped forward to persuade, "Although the Xia family has fallen, it is not a complete loss. After all, the fifth prince has not made any big moves. Your Highness, please do not get angry and hurt your body. Where there is life, there is hope. This is the desert, you will only raise dust." Jiang Xing finally could not stand it anymore and couldn't help but speak up to stop her. The two of them were fooling around, completely ignoring the mischievous expressions of the people around them. This was also a secret passage, but it was not Xian Li's secret passage. Jiang Yuan had previously ordered to have someone guard the entrance of Xian Li's secret passage. Once the 800 carriages of troops' provisions arrived, they were to send someone to stop Xian Li's men and kill them. The genie guards were originally in the business of killing people, so naturally, it was a walk in the park. They used Xian Li's secret passage to send the troops out of the city, but they did not send them to another relay station. Instead, they were transferred to the secret passage of the genie guards. Jean Eyre stared blankly and turned her head away. Who knows, they probably think that victory is in their grasp and are randomly celebrating. Deputy General Jiang, you don't have to pay attention to them, these people will eventually be defeated. Xian Li suddenly stood up from his seat, his heart beating very fast. He stared at the imperial bodyguard without moving an inch. What happened? Her tone was serious and full of hope. Jiang Xing looked at her, the firelight in the tent casting a soft pearl halo on her face, even blurring the terrible scar. The young girl's pair of bright eyes were like spring water, inexplicably moving. Xian Li's face showed a little irritation. He had already sent many people to investigate, but they could not find anything. How great was the power of the person behind this, to be able to hide so deeply. Originally, only he and Xian Hua had a chance in the fight for the throne, but he did not know when the emperor started to value the 13th Prince Xian Pei. Originally, he thought that Xian Pei's status was low, and he did not have the support of his mother's family. No matter what, he did not have the qualifications to compete with him for the position of crown prince. Now, he felt that this was not the case. The emperor's closeness to Xian Pei, even the once favored fourth prince, was not comparable. The emperor even let him use the crown prince's tutor, Lu Min. This was not a good sign. Hearing Qi Feng's words, Jiang Yuan was slightly surprised. She did not expect Qi Feng to do this. In fact, several of Xiao Xiao's martial brothers had the same habit of shielding their own. Guan Lianghan and Mo Tsong were quite critical of Jiang Yuan, but after these few days of getting along with Qi Feng, he felt that Jiang Yuan was truly blessed. People like him, who had superior intelligence, had always appreciated people who were as smart as themselves. In his eyes, Jiang Yuan's intelligence was close to that of a demon, and he really admired her very much. Since he regarded Jiang Yuan as one of his own, Qi Feng secretly inquired about Xia Jun and Jiang Chao's past conflicts with Jiang Yuan. He felt indignant for Jiang Yuan's misfortune, and finally understood why Jiang Yuan had suppressed the two of them. He did not feel that Jiang Yuan had done anything wrong. Instead, he admired her temperament of haggling over the smallest details. Naturally, he wanted to help Jiang Yuan vent her resentment. If Jiang Yuan wanted to do something, he would naturally help. Xian Li had always been a patient person. For the first time, he felt anxious and uneasy. A series of events was like a boulder, disrupting his calm heart. Seeing that he was lost in thought, Jean brought over the food on the side and said, "Today, everyone is celebrating outside. The food is good, Deputy General Jiang should also eat some." As she spoke, she opened the box of the food basket. Suddenly, a fragrant smell wafted into Jiang Xing's nose. Inside was a plate of roast beef and a few pieces of dusty dry biscuits. Jean C. shook his head and said, "What unmarried woman! I think most men in this world cannot compare to her." Xian Li picked young madam as his opponent. He must have had 8 lifetimes of bad luck. He even calculated the emperor's thoughts. "I'm afraid that even if you have the idea, you won't have the guts." "That's right." Tianzhu also stood up and looked around before saying, "She is also your master. Pay attention to your status." Jean saw that her words had caused Jiang Xing to become so silent. She became anxious and said, "Deputy General Jiang, don't think too much. You must not give up. This battle will definitely end soon and you will also be saved soon. These people are just clowns. In the end, they will all suffer a crushing defeat. Listening to the way you speak, it seems that you are very smart, Jean walked over and knocked on Lu Zhu's head with one hand. It's just that although young madam is smart and beautiful, it's a pity that the servant girls by her side are not that good. As she said this, she deliberately looked Lu Zhu up and down. Whoever married you is really unlucky. Jiang Xing looked at her quietly and suddenly said in a low voice, "Who are you? How do you know?" Qi Feng was stunned. All along, he had maintained a gentle and refined attitude. Even if he did something ruthless, the enemy was in the light while he was in the dark. He had always advanced step by step. However, he did not know when he started to encounter obstacles in everything he did. Xian Lang's death, He Yi's death, Xia Xia's fall, Imperial Consort Chen's loss of power. He did not know when it started, but he had lost all his advantages. It was as if there was an invisible hand pushing all of this, as if it was directed at him alone. He was in the light, but others were in the dark. They seemed to see him as prey, and step by step, they lured him into a trap. Yi Feng lowered his head in embarrassment. There were some doubts in his heart. In just a short period of time, Jiang Wan had inadvertently subdued so many people's hearts. She probably did not realize that the embroidered uniform guards were becoming more and more adept at using them. The embroidered uniform guards under Xiao Xiao were actually not used to participate in the struggle of the imperial court. For so many years, they had not done these things. Now that Jiang Wan wanted them to participate, no one objected. This in itself was already a kind of miracle. Although this was what was said, no one knew whether it was true or not. However, the mountains were high and the rivers were long. Since the corpse was still there, no one cared whether it was true or not. A duke of a generation had fallen and ended up in such a state. However, the common people were all clapping their hands in joy. A person who burned the army's provisions was really guilty of the most heinous crime. Who knew what kind of heart he had? Qi Feng guessed that Jiang Chao and Xia Jun had a grudge against Jiang Wan. Now that Jiang Wan had not been able to personally kill her enemy, she must be regretful. If he brought back the severed head, he might be able to compensate her a little. Unexpectedly, after Jiang Wan recovered from her astonishment, she lightly said, "It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want." Unlike the chaotic scene in the 8th Prince's Fu, at this moment, there was a joyous atmosphere in a certain place. No matter how brave the soldiers of the great Jin dynasty were, they could not withstand the swallowing of the barren grasslands. The rapid consumption of supplies was not something that anyone could bear. Without supplies, Tianjin had the advantage of being in a place where they did not have to worry about the Jin soldiers. What's more, they had heard that the Jin army's provisions had been completely burned. For the time being, there was no other way to replenish them. This meant that in the future confrontation, the great Jin would most likely run out of ammunition and provisions and be defeated without a fight. Jin stared blankly and put down the work in her hands. Somewhat embarrassed, she stuck out her tongue and said, "I'm sorry, Deputy General Jiang. I will stop now." If it were not for the large scar on her cheek that spoiled the scenery, this expression of hers would have been playful and cute. Her temperament was very good. No matter how cold Jiang Xing treated her, she could always finish her work happily. Although she was more of a hindrance than a help every day, sometimes Jiang Xing saw her bustling about and felt that she was a little cute. In fact, they did not have to wait for the 3rd day. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, the soldiers in charge of escorting the exiled prisoners sent a message by pigeon. It turned out that the 3 generations of the Xia family in Jiang Chao had committed suicide to escape punishment. As long as there was an organization, there would always be some secret rooms and secret passages. Although Jiang Wan was not familiar with the embroidered uniform guard, she knew that such an existence definitely existed. In fact, there was indeed such a place. The embroidered uniform guard transported the army's provisions to their own secret passage and used another method to disguise themselves as merchants to deliver it to the border. Not only did this solve the problem of the army's provisions at the border, it also angered Xianli to death. Xianli has made his move, Jiang Wan said indifferently, he is very courageous. Once the cunning hare is dead, the hound is cooked. Jiang Wan did not care at all as she tidied up the account book in front of her. Ever since she had entered the Fu, Steward Lin had really treated her as the matriarch of the Jining Wang Fu. Even though she had declined, in the end, the account book and the key to the treasury were still handed over to her. She did not want to deal with these matters, but after all, it was Xiao Xiao's Wang Fu. It was not good for her to just wash her hands of it like this. She said, the Xia family has been Xian Li's sword in the court for so many years. They have many enemies. Since Xian Li has already been regarded as an abandoned son by the Xia family, it is even more impossible for him to do anything. If he was killed in the middle of the exile, it would not be bad to casually use the excuse of committing suicide to escape punishment. It's just a pity that he was freed so quickly. Jean San sat down on the ground and patted the dust off his clothes. He said, young madam is really clever, to be able to think of such a way to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. If I was that nuisance of a gentle prince, I would have hung myself with a rope long ago. I can't even compare to a lady in her boudoir, what kind of hero can I be? Although Jiang Wan was a little puzzled as to why he had suddenly left, she would not waste her thoughts on this. Now that the Xia family had already fallen, she did not know what Xianli was thinking at this moment. She smiled slightly, but in her heart, a trace of joy slowly floated up. Xianli, just you wait. Wait to see your great cause of the country, slowly destroyed by my hands. Qi Feng thought about it and said, all right, then I will burn these two heads clean. I am not willing to let them be buried. In the tent, the young man looked at the young girl who was busy beside him and frowned slightly. You don't have to do this, just put it down. Composing himself, Xianli was about to summon someone to ask about the army's provisions when he saw an imperial guard scrambling in with an extremely flustered expression. He shouted loudly, Your Highness, it's not good, something has happened, something has happened. What was even more annoying was that this time, everything had originally been planned to be foolproof, but something had gone wrong midway. On the surface, it seemed that Xia Jun and Jiang Chao did not handle things well, but Xianli himself was very clear that there must be some other reason for the sudden arrival of the city's garrison troops. He just did not know what the reason was. He had also tried to make indirect inquiries, but unfortunately, that official was a block of wood and could not be pried open no matter how hard he tried. Perhaps, he really did not know anything. There must be someone controlling this matter from behind the scenes. As long as he thought that this person was actually so cunning and had been waiting for him to enter the trap, Xianli felt a chill run down his spine. What I find strange is, how did she know about Xianli's secret passage? Yi Feng muttered. This secret passage had not been used for so many years, and even the brocade guards had not been able to find out about it. Now, this was also the first time that Xianli had used it, but Jiang Wan seemed to have already known about it. Every part of it was extremely detailed. For the brocade guards, who originally relied on intelligence, this was really somewhat unimaginable. Jean blinked her eyes. I stole a few pieces of dry biscuits, and I asked someone else for the beef. You should have a taste. Lecher, Lu Zhu immediately stood up in anger. Who are you talking about? Jean stared blankly at him. What? The person is already dead, and I have achieved my goal. Spending more effort on this matter is just a waste of time. Jiang Wan said. In the 8th Prince's Fu, Xianli's face revealed a depressed expression for the first time. The teacup in front of him had long been tipped over, and it was obvious that the host had just vented his anger. Yuan Chuan smiled as he took the cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. The firelight outlined his graceful and mysterious figure, and his beautiful chin was full of temptation. He turned to look at the soldiers who were singing and laughing merrily. Everyone's faces were full of joy, but, why did the great Jin dynasty lose contact with the army's provisions after they were burned? This was not an ordinary matter. Those people of the Central Plains, who thought themselves elegant, loved to commit treacherous acts. Could it be that this alliance was not as reliable as it appeared on the surface? Or had there been some unforeseen event? Yuan Chuan slowly lowered his head. Today's dry biscuits were probably the same. The food that the people of Nanjiang had prepared for him was certainly not this. He was too lazy to haggle over it, and after eating a few mouthfuls, he asked, "Why celebrate? Army provisions?" Xian Li slowly calmed down. Thinking about the army provisions, his depression slowly dissipated. That's right, he had not lost yet. The 800 carriages provisions were still in his hands. As long as he had the provisions, he could send them to Tianjin in exchange for most of the benefits. It would take some time for the Xia family's silver to be used again to raise the army provisions. In this battle, he might not necessarily be the loser. Although it could not be said that the brocade guards could catch all of them in one fell swoop, the brocade guards were not certain to win. Now, the army provisions were being transported non-stop through the secret passage to the courier station outside the capital. As long as they reached the courier station, the 800 carriages provisions would have nothing to do with the brocade guards. You don't hate them? Seeing Jiang Ruan's indifference, Qi Feng was startled and asked uncertainly. When Qi Feng returned with the news, he saw that Jiang Ruan only responded indifferently and said, "Third sister-in-law, why do you look so careless? Aren't you afraid that they have been rescued?" Xian Li himself had sent people to kill the Xia father and son in order to avoid future trouble. Such a move was tantamount to cutting off an arm. Although he kept saying that the Xia family was not important, for so many years, many of Xian Li's matters had to be completed through the hands of the Xia Fu. This was a good knife that he was used to using. Seeing that the battle for the throne was so close at hand, he had to change his knife at the last minute. To him, how hateful was this? What's more, the emperor had taken away all the Xia family's wealth, which meant that the silver that he originally received from the Xia family every year was now all gone. Qi Feng touched his nose. "Your guess is 80 to 90% correct." He said, "The brocade guards were sent to keep an eye on them." When the Xia father and son and Jiang Chao found out that Xian Li had sent people to silence them, their expressions changed. Unfortunately, they were one step too late, and it was too late to regret. "Third sister-in-law, I acted on my own initiative to exchange the heads of Xia Jun and Jiang Chao." He looked at Jiang Ruan's expression. "Third sister-in-law, how do you want to deal with this?" Xian Li's most intelligent advisor looked at him with some worry. Xian Li had always walked more steadily than others. Now that his heart was in a mess, this was a big taboo. Once his heart was in a mess, it was easy to make mistakes. If all this was really being manipulated behind the scenes, that person would definitely not let go of Xian Li's mistake. With a "pa" sound, Xian Li's teacup suddenly fell to the ground. Chapter 179. Jiang Xing had guessed many things, but he had not expected Jin to be Jiang Ruan's friend. He was startled and said, "What? You don't remember me?" Jin looked at Jiang Xing's confused expression and was somewhat anxious. She looked around to make sure no one was around before she leaned in and said, "At the palace banquet, you saved my life. I am here to repay the debt of gratitude. Don't you remember?" Jiang Xing frowned. At first, he felt that this girl looked somewhat familiar, but he did not know why. Now that she reminded him, he suddenly remembered. At the palace banquet of Empress Dowager Ida, assassins had come out to assassinate her, and he seemed to have saved two girls in passing. Now that he thought about it, the face of the girl in front of him overlapped. "But," he said in surprise, "you are an official's daughter, why are you here?" At that time, he did not pay attention and naturally did not know this girl's identity. It was possible that she was attending the palace banquet, so she must be an official's daughter. How could such a delicate young lady enter the enemy camp? It would be a problem to travel from the capital to the border thousands of miles away. What about her parents? Our Fu has always had rules. The life-saving grace must be repaid with gushes of spring. Jean Her said seriously, since you saved my life, I should repay you no matter what. You are trapped in the enemy camp. If something happens to you, I won't even have the chance to repay you. This is a violation of the Fu's precepts, so I took the liberty of mixing in with the female members of the reinforcement army camp to come here. If my parents knew, they would definitely support me in doing so. This was completely sophistry. For a girl to come out so boldly, and an official's family was even more concerned about reputation, her parents must have been angered half to death. Yet, she could still speak so eloquently. Jiang Xing had a headache and said, "You should not have come here, it is too dangerous." Since I am here, I am not afraid of danger. Jean Her spoke very quickly, which was very much in line with her straightforward character. If you drive me away now, it will be really dangerous. Then how did you enter the enemy camp? Although he could roughly remember what Jean had said and she was Jiang Ruan's friend, Jiang Xing could no longer treat her coldly. However, he still had doubts in his heart. Jean heard this and smiled. Deputy General Jiang, Xiao Wangye's genie guards have arrived, how can they just stand by and watch? In any case, you are Xiao Wangye's brother-in-law. If Xiao Wangye ignores you, will Ruan Mimi let him go? Xiao Wangye has sent people to save you, but... Jean stuck out her tongue, the martial arts of his subordinates are too high. The people of the southern border are treacherous and they are afraid of arousing suspicion. Ordinary women are not willing to go. The bold ones are not smart, and the smart ones are afraid of death. Only I am bold and smart, so I volunteered. So, Prince Xiao sent me. Only I am brave and smart, I volunteered, so Xiao Wangye sent me. She finished speaking in one breath and even took the opportunity to praise herself a few times, making her seem even more frank and lively. Perhaps it was because she was different from the noble young ladies commonly seen in the capital, she even dared to tease him about Xiao Xiao. Jiang Xing was slightly surprised. He didn't know which family she came from to have such a pleasant temperament. He asked, "Which family's young miss are you? What is your father's name?" Jean was startled and smiled, "My father is just a small military officer. I don't think Deputy General Jiang knows him. As for young miss, you can call me Jean Her. I am now your maidservant, not a young miss." Jiang Xing paused and said in a low voice, "I saved you, not because I want you to repay me. You are a young lady. It is too risky to do such a thing. In the future, you must be careful. The people of Nanjiang are too cunning. I will use my own methods to protect you. You also need to be careful. If necessary, you don't need to worry about me." This was a warning. Jiang Xing's words showed that he believed Jean and would protect her in the future. The young man's expression was resolute. His facial features were refined, but he also had the sharpness of someone who practiced martial arts. His actions and words were open and aboveboard, and his serious appearance had a different kind of charm. Jean slightly blushed and took a step back. "Yes." While the two of them were talking, the outside had unknowingly quietened down. It was deep into the night, the southern border soldiers had all drunk the strong wine and were sleeping soundly on the ground. It was quiet outside, the entire camp had sunk into an extreme silence, as if it was very peaceful. Jiang Xing frowned. People who practice martial arts will have a great feeling when they see a little change. Especially at this moment, although nothing happened, his heart faintly felt that something was wrong. This military camp was too quiet. It was so quiet that he felt like something was going to happen next. However, he didn't open the tent and look outside. The two soldiers were still there. Jean noticed his expression and seemed to feel a little uneasy. She moved closer to Jiang Xing's ear and whispered, "Why is it so quiet? It's almost like..." Her voice was too soft, so Jiang Xing couldn't hear her clearly. He turned his head, wanting to hear what she was saying. Who knew that as soon as he turned his head, Jean's lips brushed past his cheek. Jiang Xing's body stiffened, and Jean's face instantly turned red. Jiang Xing had never had such intimate contact with a woman in his life. Perhaps it was because he had personally witnessed the cruel scheming of his wives and concubines in the Jiangfu, but other than his only sister, Jiang Xing always kept a respectful distance from women. He was a deputy general in the military camp and had a bright future ahead of him. Later on, he was known as the god of war. Not to mention those who wanted to use their daughters to build connections, there were also many women who came forward to express their love for him. He was young, handsome, tall and extraordinary. He also acted like a gentleman and naturally attracted people's attention. Now that he was so rude, Jiang Xing was a little annoyed, but he did not know how to apologize to Jean. After a brief moment of panic, Jean calmed down. Under the dim light, her expression could not be seen clearly. She turned her head and nonchalantly said, "I think it's a little strange. Could it be that Xiao Wangye has sent people to rescue us?" Jiang Xing was stunned. He heard Jean say, "How much of your martial arts have you recovered?" 70%. Jiang Xing thought for a moment before answering. "Can you beat the two people outside?" Jean asked. "I can." "That's good." Jean became a little nervous. "You have to be prepared." I think I heard a signal outside." "Signal?" Jiang Xing felt strange. "I asked before I came here." "Wolves howl as a signal." Listen, in the quiet night, there were indeed a few wolf howls. There were many hungry wolves on the grasslands, but they always kept a respectful distance from the soldiers with torches and guns. Now that there were a few wolf howls in the distance, it didn't seem to be a big deal. But Jean was so sure that there must be a special rhythm. The two people in the tent held their breath. The night outside was dark and there seemed to be a rustling sound in the dark. The soldiers turned over and continued to sleep, so they ignored the slight sound. Until the rustling sound became a crackling sound, mixed with the sound of something collapsing, a piece of hardwood falling, waking a sleeping soldier with a thud. He rubbed his eyes, stood up, and walked out of the tent. He wanted to see what was making such a big noise. As soon as he got out of the tent, he felt a wave of heat hitting his face. The smell of alcohol suddenly woke him up. He immediately opened his eyes wide and saw a tongue of fire spreading wantonly in the distance, almost lighting up the entire sky. The dark night was as bright as day, and the light of the fire was reflected in his eyes. The fire grew bigger and bigger, almost engulfing his thoughts. Only when the fire had already spread to the nearest tent did he suddenly wake up. He let out a miserable scream with difficulty from his throat, and then shouted with a changed tone, "Get up quickly. Get up. The granary is on fire." Like a clap of thunder in the dark night, it almost woke up everyone in the tent. The soldiers rushed out of the tent and were immediately stunned by the scene in front of them. They couldn't care about anything else and said, "Quickly put out the fire, quickly put out the fire," but in this wasteland, water was precious. Food and water were scarce. Such a big fire couldn't help. But the place that was on fire was the granary. That was the rations and provisions for the soldiers of the southern border. The fire was burning more and more fiercely. The soldiers were distressed, but then they felt a deep fear. Before the troops and horses moved, the rations and fodder came first. Originally, they had been laughing at the great Jin dynasty's rations and provisions being burned away in the capital. Now it was their turn. The soldiers of the great Jin dynasty had lost their rations and could only rely on what they had before. But now that their rations had been completely burned, they couldn't even last for a day. What's more, they didn't have enough water. They had to watch helplessly as the rations they relied on for survival turned into a pile of ashes. How cruel. What are you panicking for? Use the sand to put out the fire. A low shout suddenly came from the darkness. Everyone looked over and saw that the man in gray had stood up. His voice was deep, obviously full of anger. Be careful not to disturb the holy maiden. Advisor. The rations and provisions have been burned. A soldier couldn't help but panic. What should we do? Shut up, Yuan Chuan said. All soldiers, go to the sand dune in front and scoop up the sand. If anyone dares to disturb, they will be dealt with according to military law. The soldiers immediately fell silent. Yuan Chuan was their leader. With Yuan Chuan around, there seemed to be nothing to worry about. At Yuan Chuan's command, everyone rushed to the nearest sand dune. Yuan Chuan stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His loose robe covered most of his face, making it impossible to see his expression. However, his beautiful red lips didn't curl up like before. It was obvious that he wasn't in a good mood. Although he spoke with certainty, looking at the state of the fire, it was clear that the rations and fodder could no longer be salvaged. He was powerless to do anything. The fingers hidden under his robe slowly curled into a fist. Yuan Chuan stood rooted to the ground, as if he had forgotten something. This fire must have been set by the soldiers of the great Jin dynasty. This was a sinister move. They had underestimated the embroidered uniform guards. They hadn't made any moves these days. Were they waiting for an opportunity? They had chosen this time, when the soldiers of the southern border were most relaxed. They had really put in a lot of effort. But what had they forgotten? Yuan Chuan looked over, his gaze pausing when it passed by a certain large tent. Outside the tent, two soldiers were still standing ramrod straight, but their postures were somewhat stiff. Yuan Chuan turned his head. The two soldiers didn't move an inch, like two statues of stone. Yuan Chuan's heart skipped a beat. He shouted, quickly, go see where Jiang Xing is. The soldiers were also startled. They hurriedly ran to the large tent where Jiang Xing was being held, only to find that the two guards at the door had been dead for a long time. They were only being supported by a long pole to maintain a standing posture. The large tent had long been empty. There was no one inside. Not good, Jiang Xing has escaped. A panicked voice floated over the entire southern border barracks. Yuan Chuan stood in the distance, pursing his lips tightly. In a fierce voice, he said, in such a short time, he can't have escaped far. Chase him. The subordinate received the order and left. Yuan Chuan looked at the raging fire in the granary in the distance, then looked at the empty tent. There was no one in the tent. Even the servant girl had disappeared. Jiang Xing was a man who had tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex. Something was wrong. He seemed to have thought of something. His body suddenly stiffened. Jiang Xing's daily meals were laced with muscle-softening powder. How did he defeat the guards at the door? In today's fire, he took advantage of the chaos to escape. How did he grasp the situation so accurately and coordinate so seamlessly? That servant girl, that servant girl. Jiang Xing was not a person who easily trusted others. Especially in this southern border barracks, he was on guard against everyone. The spy they had sent to Jiang Xing's side had not been able to obtain any useful information from Jiang Xing's mouth. Now, on his escape, Jiang Xing had even brought along a servant girl. That servant girl was certainly not that simple. Perhaps she had been sent by Xiao Xiao to receive Jiang Xing. Yuan Chuan's face was as calm as still water. He had long been furious in his heart. All his life, he had thought that he was extremely intelligent and everything was within his grasp. He did not expect that he would be tricked like this. Firstly, that servant girl did not seem to have any high level of martial arts. Secondly, he had expected that this servant girl would not have such courage. Yet, she had managed to fool him. Today, Xiao Xiao had sent people to burn down his granary and let Jiang Xing escape. How could this not be a great humiliation to him? The anger in his heart at the humiliation was greater than anything else. At night, the wind in the wilderness was extremely strong. The sound of the horses' hooves could be heard. The whistling wind blew the long hair of the people riding the horse high up. Jin sat on the horse and Jiang Xing was behind her. His hands were around her and holding the reins. It looked like he was holding her whole body in his arms. Because they were too close, Jin's face turned slightly red. In order not to let the man behind her notice her embarrassment, she said, "What if they catch up?" Jiang Xing faintly smiled, thinking that she was afraid. He comforted her by saying, "Don't be afraid. Once we cross Liao Shui River, we will be fine. Since Xiao Xiao sent people to receive us, naturally, he has made full preparations." Jin thought for a moment, then suddenly laughed. "Xiao Wanye's move is really ruthless. When he saved you, he also set fire to the granary. This is called giving him a taste of his own medicine. If I was a person from the southern wilderness, I am afraid that I will die of anger at this moment." Xiao Tianyeo's face changed. Jiang Xing didn't understand what she meant by giving people a taste of their own medicine. He was under house arrest in the tent, so he was not well informed. At this moment, when he heard Jin's words, he guessed some things. Thinking of Jin's performance, he smiled and said, "Your martial arts is good, and your courage is also very big." In fact, Jin's martial arts was still far from being good. He could only see that she had practiced martial arts before. But, he thought that it was because the people in the Xiao family were distressed that a good girl practiced martial arts. Jin's martial arts were relatively shallow and could only be used for self-defense. If he were to say that he admired her, it was because of her ruthlessness. In the face of those guards who woke up and blocked the road, she showed no fear. She was not soft-hearted at all. She was like a martial artist from a military family. When Jin heard this, she looked back and said with a smile, "That is natural," as she seemed to realize something, so her words stopped abruptly. She looked at Jiang Xing with some uneasiness, but she found out that Jiang Xing was looking at her. Jiang Xing stretched out his hand to touch her face. She was so nervous that she did not move. She watched as Jiang Xing peeled off a piece of skin from her face. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Fake?" That burn scar was currently in Jiang Xing's hand. Jin let out a sigh of relief. When she heard this, she smiled and said, "Of course it is fake. If I don't disguise myself, it would not be good. Earlier, you did not recognize me. Now, look at me. Do you still recognize me?" Her smile was very open and frank. She deliberately moved closer to Jiang Xing so that he could take a closer look. She was still holding a small torch in her hand. Under the illumination of the fire, her skin was clean and white, and the layer of scars had faded away. She could really be considered a beautiful girl. Her facial features were delicate, and there was a kind of heroic spirit about her. Her every move was very frank. Jiang Xing's heart was slightly moved. He turned his head away and said, "Back then, you were just a little girl. Now, she was a young and inexperienced girl." He felt an indescribable joy in his heart. Previously, when he saw the scar on Jin's face, he thought that Jin had encountered some unforeseen event in the past few years. He did not want to poke at her sore spot. Now that he discovered that it was only a fake scar, he let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he secretly felt that his worries were funny. When did he start paying attention to these trivial matters? In the time that they were moving, the two of them had already arrived at the Liao River. There was a small bridge made of bamboo on top of it. The water below was surging with huge waves. It seemed that if they were not careful, they would be swallowed by the waves. Jiang Xing and Jin dismounted from their horses and drove the horses away. The two of them stepped onto the bridge. When they crossed the other side, they saw that there was indeed someone waiting on the other side. When that person saw that Jiang Xing and Jin had safely arrived, he did not say anything further. He ordered his companions to draw their knives and cut the cables on this side of the bridge. The bridge was cut with a loud bang. Even if the Nanjiang people wanted to cross the river, they would not be able to do so for the time being. The few of them jumped onto the large horses that had been prepared earlier and disappeared into the night. In the Great Jin's barracks, the young man sitting on the commander's seat was dressed in a dark green military uniform. His eyes were as cold as jade. A subordinate imperial bodyguard entered the tent and reported, "Master, Deputy General Jiang and Miss Xiao are already safe. They will arrive shortly. The Nanjiang people's granary has also been burned by us. There shouldn't be any more mishaps for the time being." Xiao Xiao faintly grunted and lowered his eyes without saying anything. Guan Lianghan, who was sitting to the side, could not help but say, "Lao San, your subordinates are truly extraordinary. They were able to burn down the enemy's barracks without making a sound. If it were my subordinates, I'm afraid that they would not be able to do it so beautifully. Under the heavens, only you, the brocade guard, can do something like this. This is too fucking satisfying." He ran outside in a white robe draped over his shoulders. Inside, white bandages could faintly be seen. Currently, the wounds on his body had not completely healed. However, he could no longer restrain himself and was determined to see how this battle would be fought. At that time, Guan Lianghan and Jiang Xing had been injured because they had been ambushed by the Nanjiang spies. Guan Lianghan hated the Nanjiang people to the point of gnashing his teeth. The Nanjiang people's stomachs are full of evil water. We are fighting with those grandsons of Tianjin, but the Nanjiang people also want to interfere. Isn't this an upright method? What kind of ability is this to play dirty tricks? All is fair in war. Xiao Xiao said lightly, but his brows were slightly knitted. He naturally understood why the Nanjiang people would interfere. However, there were some things that could not be revealed to outsiders. Guan Lianghan also did not know the deeper meaning behind it. The ambition of the Nanjiang people was evident. Now was the time to lure the snake out of its hole. He spared no effort in suppressing the Nanjiang people. In fact, it was not as far-reaching as Guan Lianghan had thought. Xiao Xiao thought of the letter sent by pigeon from the capital. It was written that Xia Jun and Jiang Chao had joined forces to burn the provisions that were being transported to the frontier, but in the end, they had been blocked by Jiang Wan, who had returned a tooth for a tooth. Xianli had suffered a double loss, and Xia Jun and Jiang Chao had also suffered the consequences of their own actions. Qi Feng's letter had unintentionally revealed his admiration for Jiang Wan. Xiao Xiao also felt honored. However, since Xianli had also colluded with the Nanjiang, and they had plotted against the brocade guard in the capital, Jiang Wan had blocked them for him. However, Jinying Wang Fu had never suffered a loss and swallowed it into their stomach. Naturally, he would spare no effort to get back at them. Therefore, without thinking, he had people burn down the Nanjiang people's granary. The Nanjiang people and Tianjin people must have reached some kind of agreement. Since this fire had burned the provisions of the Nanjiang barracks, the Nanjiang people would naturally seek help from Tianjin. However, Tianjin was currently unable to fend for itself. Moreover, it was a small place that did not have abundant resources. How could they come up with such a large amount of provisions? If they could not come up with provisions, the Nanjiang people would not continue to be stationed here. There was no such thing as throwing away one's life for nothing. If the alliance between the Nanjiang and Tianjin broke, they would split up and attack one by one. As for Zhao Jin, he had not yet found a suitable candidate. Since Zhao Jin had volunteered, it seemed that she was very suitable, so he had tacitly agreed. Now that Jiang Xing had been safely rescued, there were some things that he did not have to worry about. He could really go all out with peace of mind. Guan Lianghan said, "Now that old Jiang has returned and the Nanjiang strength has been greatly damaged, we only need to concentrate on Tianjin. Damn it, I, your father, have long been unhappy with those Tianjin grandsons. Lao San, I am much more at ease now that you are here. This time, if we do not teach Tianjin a lesson, we are not worthy of being called brothers from Jianan Mountain." These words were meant to provoke him, but Guan Lianghan himself knew that it was actually not necessary. This was because Xiao Xiao's temperament was really very direct. He was so direct that his battle tactics did not require too much finesse. With such an invincible army, coupled with his master's cold and decisive orders, the depression that had accumulated because of Jiang Xing's imprisonment, now that there was a breakthrough, he would definitely mercilessly vent it all out. This battlefield would soon become a charaba. Chapter 180. On the snow-white woolen carpet, the woman's gorgeous dress swayed, drawing a gorgeous red line. The crimson veil covered her face, revealing only a pair of bright eyes. It was a pair of beautiful eyes, incomparably clear at a glance, with a kind of naive bewitchment. It was as if one would be intoxicated by those eyes if they looked at them. The grey-clothed man stood below the woman, his voice containing a trace of imperceptible nervousness. "Holy Maiden, Jiang Xing has escaped. There are people on Liao Shuihe's side who can't catch up." Silence. After a long time, a languid woman's voice sounded in the air, "Is that so? You can't even do such a small thing well. Yuan Chuan, the more you live, the more you turn back. Holy Maiden is right." Yuan Chuan lowered his head and said, "Although Jiang Xing has escaped, it is not that we have gained nothing this time. There is news from the capital that Xianli has failed in the matter of the provisions. Their spies have yet to find out, but our people have already discovered the signs. The person who did it is hiding in Jining Wangfu." The words Jining Wangfu clearly moved the woman on the seat. She tilted her head, her voice containing a slight smile. "Oh. Who is that person?" Before Jining Wang left, he brought his two martial brothers, Qi Si and Xia Wu, back to the capital. Now, both of them live near Jining Wangfu. But Jining Wang's purpose in bringing them over is to protect Jining Wangfei, the eldest daughter of the Jiang family, Jiang Xing's younger sister, and the current Hong and Junju. This time, the matter of the provisions was handled in a different manner from Qi Si's. If the information that my subordinates have sent back is correct, it is most likely from Jining Wangfei's hands. The woman on the seat did not speak, but there seemed to be a tense atmosphere spreading in the air. The surrounding maids all lowered their heads. After an unknown amount of time, the slowly rising incense almost burned out. Yuan Chuan maintained his respectful posture of bowing his head and did not move. Only then did he hear a cold laugh slowly coming from above. "Jining Wangfei. What is that thing?" Yuan Chuan carefully glanced at the woman in front of her. Her bright eyes instantly became deep and serene, and a familiar emotion flashed across them. The woman slowly stood up. She was not tall and could be said to be petite. She wore a bright red dress that outlined her graceful figure, and every move she made was charming. This kind of charm was not the charm of a woman from a brothel. Instead, it was a kind of naive attitude. It was as if she was born like this, like a beautiful cub that was born to be seduced. "He has burned our provisions, the southern border soldiers cannot participate in this battle." She said word by word, her voice still as lazy as before, but her words were incomparably calm. "Exactly. The Tianjin nation has sent back news that they can't provide us with too much money. They hope that we can think of a way ourselves." Yuan Chuan said, What do you mean, Saint? The soldiers' provisions had been burned, and the soldiers could no longer stay here. The kingdom of Tianjin could barely take care of itself now, and they lacked trust in the southern border. Naturally, they were unwilling to provide extra provisions. How could a little bit of provisions solve the urgent situation? If the southern border still wanted to help Tianjin deal with the Jin dynasty, it would be an arduous and thankless task. Treacherous people don't deserve to be my allies, the woman said coldly. The Tianjin nation is about to lose. They themselves know this, that's why they are like this. Yuan Chuan, go back and give the order, the alliance is over, let the soldiers quickly return to the southern border. Yuan Chuan stared blankly for a moment, then probingly asked, Holy Maiden, if we return to the southern border just like this, the great Jin dynasty sighed. Holy Maiden is prepared to give up. Yuan Chuan knew better than anyone else why they had to form an alliance with the Tianjin nation. Now that he heard the saintess' decision, he felt incredulous. Yuan Chuan, when have I ever given up? The woman sighed, but the expression in her eyes became somewhat strange. The root cause of our suffering this time is that something went wrong in the Jin dynasty's capital. The Jiang family's daughter that you mentioned really displeases me. You've captured the war god of the great Jin dynasty for so long and interrogated him every day. What have you found out? Yuan Chuan lowered his head guiltily. Your subordinate is incompetent. I was unable to get the truth out of Jiang Xing. Wrong. The saintess shook her head and said, he said it a long time ago, it's just that you didn't notice. Yuan Chuan is dull, please enlighten me, saintess. He looked at the woman in confusion, but heard the woman's languid and gentle voice say, you interrogate him every day, but he refuses to say anything, not even the slightest clue. As far as I know, when Jiang Xing was in the army and fought, he was not such a cautious person. For him to be so cautious, the person he was protecting must be someone extremely important. I heard that Jiang Xing and this daughter of the Jiang family have an extremely good relationship. When Jiang Xing first returned to the capital of the great Jin dynasty, it was also this Jiang Ruan who rescued him from an ambush. Ever since these two siblings met, Jiang Xing's official career has been steadily promoted, and everything has been smooth sailing. Do you think this is a coincidence? Yuan Chuan was startled. In a flash, he had already understood many things. He looked at the woman and said, Saintess suspects. But she is only an ordinary woman, how could she know so much about the future? There were many capable people in the world, but a woman who stayed in her boudoir, no matter how one looked at it, was too unbelievable. As a citizen of the southern border, you are also from a family of witchcraft music. What is impossible? The voice under the veil of the saintess was pleasant to listen to, but if one listened carefully, there was a faint murderous intent in it. You ignored all this because you did not take her seriously. You thought that she was no match for you. And I, from the beginning, had never thought of sparing her life. Yuan Chuan lowered his head. Saintess is wise. He actually invited his fellow disciples back to the capital to protect her. I originally thought that with her intelligence, she could be of use to me, but now it seems that she is disgusting. The daughter of the Jiang family was able to silently destroy the secret agents we planted in the capital, and even that good-for-nothing Xianli was defeated by her. This is an eye-opener for me. I heard that Xiao Xiao defeated Tianjin, and after returning to the capital, he will marry her. She suddenly laughed lightly. Just hearing it sounds ridiculous. She did not say anything harsh, and her tone was as languid and gentle as before, even with a hint of sweet charm. But when Yuan Chuan heard this, he shuddered. He had been by the saintess' side for so many years, and he knew all too well what she wanted to do. The more it was like this, the deeper the hatred in her heart, and the more ruthless she would be. Finally, Yuan Chuan could not help but ask, Saintess, do you want to make a move on her? The woman glanced at him. There are people who are more anxious than us. Think of a way to leak the news to Xianli, and say that the burning of the granary was the idea of the daughter of the Jiang family. Now that I can't leave, the Jin court should start to act on some matters. Yuan Chuan, on the day that the Jin court returns to the capital, mix into the team and follow them to the capital. Saintis. Yuan Chuan was startled and said, "We're starting to act now. The people of the Jin court are becoming more and more useless. The only one I can trust is you." She looked at Yuan Chuan with a smile, and her beautiful eyes were like fine gems, like a young girl looking at her most beloved lover. She said, "Yuan Chuan, besides doing my arrangements, you have another task. Xianli is really too incompetent. If he can't kill the daughter of the Jiang family, you will kill her for me. I don't want to see her live for too long." She slowly said, enunciating each word, after returning to the capital, "Get married? I also want to see what it looks like to be married to a corpse." Yuan Chuan's heart trembled, and he respectfully complied. He turned and left the tent. Time seemed to pass very quickly. In the end, there was no more bad news from the border. When Deputy General Jiang heard that he had been rescued by Jining Wang, he was tortured from head to toe, but he still clenched his teeth and did not surrender. Such a tough man naturally made the emperor very happy. The previous rumors fell apart, and the courtiers who had been watching from the sidelines now had other ideas. They estimated whether it was possible for their own daughters to form a marriage alliance with the Jiang family. The Jiang family was strange. They were originally a virtuous aristocratic family, but no one knew what kind of bad luck they had run into these past few years. First, the mistress had made a cuckold of the minister, and then second young Miss Jiang, who was originally known as a fairy, had no self-respect and her reputation was ruined. Later, second young Master Jiang in the Xia family rebelled and burned the granary. The emperor saw that the Jiang family was so useless that Minister Jiang's official career seemed to have come to an end, and the Jiang family was not far from decline. But to speak of decline, the Jiang family had produced Hong and Junju, who was deeply favored by Empress Dowager Ida. The eldest young Master Jiang had a promising future as the god of war of the great Jin dynasty. Even the fourth young miss, who was born of a concubine, had now climbed to the third rank, Jiang Zhaoi. Looking at it this way, Minister Jiang's days were not difficult. Some nosy people found out that Minister Jiang had originally favored Jiang Chao and his sister, who were born of Xia Yan. He had treated Jiang Xing and his sister, who were born of his deceased wife, coldly. Jiang Dan was even more so. Who knew that the wheel of fortune would turn? The two siblings, who were originally the least favored, were now living the best lives. The Jiang family had relied on them to bring glory to the family. It was really regrettable. At this moment, winter had passed and the new year was coming, but the weather was still as cold as before. Snowflakes rustled and fell from the sky. Jiang Wan stood in front of the courtyard. The snowflakes that fell to the ground quickly melted, and her light red dress was like a ball of fire in the snow, shining brilliantly. Qi Feng stood beside her and suddenly said, "Third brother will be back soon." The war between Tianjin and the Great Jin dynasty was about to be settled at the beginning of this year's spring. Tianjin had already angered the Great Jin dynasty. Now, Tianjin was retreating step by step. The brocade guards led by Xiao Xiao were ruthless and cruel. They had almost fought their way into their city. Tianjin was now at the end of the road, and it was only a matter of time before they surrendered to the Great Jin dynasty. But Tianjin did not even have the strength to resist stubbornly. As soon as the war ended, Xiao Xiao naturally rushed over without stopping. Jiang Wan gently nodded. Qi Feng said, "When third brother returns, you will be married." As he said this, he actually felt a trace of bitterness in his mouth. He turned his head and saw the young girl in front of him. She was dressed in a light red dress, and it was as if thousands of rays of light were sprinkled on her body. Her eyes were bright and charming like a flower. She looked like a ball of fire, but only when he got closer would he discover that it was just a block of ice. These days, he had accompanied this young girl and watched her devise strategies. He watched her predict the future, but it seemed as if she did not care about anything at all. He occasionally wondered if everything in this world could not enter her eyes. Now that he had mentioned the news that Xiao Xiao was about to return, Jiang Ruan's thoughtful expression fell into his eyes. Qi Feng immediately understood. He concealed the emotions in his eyes and teased, "Third sister-in-law, when that day comes, I think the brothers of Jia Nan Mountain will come back to ask for a cup of wedding wine." Jiang Ruan smiled and said, "Thank you." Her attitude was always so distant, but not close enough. Qi Feng looked away and found an excuse to leave. Only Jiang Ruan was left standing in the courtyard. Winter passed and spring came. Many things happened this year. Xiao Xiao, who was originally at the border, sent back news that Zhao Jin had gone to the border. This was really beyond her expectations. Zhao Jin had also rescued Jiang Xing. Zhao Jin came from a military family, and she did things with the forthright style of a man. Jiang Ruan informed Zhao Furan of this matter, and Zhao Furan was relieved. The two brothers of the Zhao family were reasonable and did not make things difficult for her. However, when Lin Zixiang found out about this matter, she went to Jining Wang Fu to reprimand Jiang Ruan. She blamed Jiang Ruan for being in the wrong, saying how could Jiang Xing so casually seduce Zhao Jin. This was really too unreasonable, which made Jiang Ruan feel somewhat helpless. Speaking of Lin Zixiang, nowadays, she frequently ran over to Jining Wang Fu, but it was not to see Jiang Ruan. In the end, she had an ulterior motive. She did not know what had started the enmity between her and Xia Qing, but after the misunderstanding was cleared up, the two of them chatted happily. Xia Qing, on the other hand, seemed to like Lin Zixiang very much. It was just that these two people's minds were too clear. Baizhi and Yifeng were now somewhat close, and Baizhi would also send some snacks to Yifeng from time to time. In any case, Yifeng had once been Xiao Xiao's right-hand man. In other places, he would have been a man of outstanding status, but every day, regardless of his status, he would come looking for reasons to talk to Baizhi. Even a fool could see the meaning behind this. Compared to Baizhi and Yifeng's gentleness, Lu Zhu and Jin Er fought and quarreled all day long. As long as the two of them were together, they would quarrel. Anyone with a discerning eye could see the reason behind this. Unfortunately, between the two of them, one always had the appearance of a debauchee, while the other was always carefree. No one knew when they would be able to achieve a positive result. Jiang Quan was now even unwilling to come to Jining Wang Fu. Ever since Jiang Chao had met with an accident, Jiang Quan had used a commanding tone to order Jiang Wan to think of a way to save Jiang Chao, but Jiang Wan had ignored him. After Jiang Chao's death, Jiang Quan seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. When he looked at Jiang Wan again, it was already like a stranger. Jiang Wan was very clear about his thoughts, and he harbored resentment towards Jiang Wan. Now that Jiang Quan had taken in a few more concubines, it seemed that he wanted to leave a descendant for the Jiang family. He had never been willing to treat Jiang Xing as his own son. Sometimes, Jiang Wan also felt that it was strange. In her previous life, Jiang Quan was a man who loved power, and would do anything to climb up. Now that she and Jiang Xing could bring the Jiang Fu to greater heights, Jiang Quan had never thought of pleasing them, and even hated them as he always had. Perhaps some people were born to be wronged, and hatred was innate. No matter what Jiang Wan and Jiang Xing did, as long as they were Zhao Mei's children, Jiang Quan could not possibly like them. As a father, his side was forever only open to Jiang Su and Jiang Chao. Ever since the rations incident, Xianli had been incomparably quiet, and there had been no other movements. Obviously, the destruction of the Xia family had caused a huge loss to Xianli. Over the past year, he had hidden himself from the public eye, and had been a well-behaved prince in the court. He had not even done anything in private. Most of his original power had been destroyed, and after the Xia family had fallen, it had been very difficult for him to find a replacement for the Xia family. The fifth prince, Xian Hua, had become more and more steady, and even the 13th prince, Xian Pei, had gained the emperor's favor, and even Empress Dowager Ida was very fond of him. The crown prince seemed to have become smarter, and was no longer as preposterous as before. With so many opponents in such a short period of time, Xianli probably did not feel good in his heart. However, this did not mean that Xianli intended to give up. On the contrary, Jiang Wan understood him very well. Xianli had not made a move yet, because he had not found the right opportunity. This person was most adept at concealing his strength and obscurity. Once there was an opportunity, he would naturally not hesitate to make a move. Jiang Dan had now risen from a beauty to a third-rank Xiao Yi. She was very successful in the palace. From the empress to the palace maids, everyone admired her very much. Even a strict person like Empress Dowager Ida could not find fault with her. She had already secretly colluded with Xianli, and her days were not bad. She was a careful and intelligent person, and concealed her ambition very well. In the palace, she had been promoted step by step, and each step she took was very steady. She was living well, but Jiang Wan was not anxious. This golden age was just a one-handed hunt, and it all depended on who had more patience. She had endured patiently for a lifetime, so what harm was there in waiting for a few days? Jiang Wan lowered her eyes and stretched out her hand to catch a falling snowflake. The snowflake quickly melted in her palm. The new year was approaching, and in a trance, it seemed that she had returned to the year of her rebirth. She had been curled up in a dirty room in Zhonglan's family's manor, and she could not even afford to burn charcoal. She had woken up from the blood-soaked past life, and all she could see was the cruel reality. Her enemies were high above, and she was below. Time flew by, and now, she stood in Jining Wangfu. Her position seemed to have been reversed. Her enemies were either dead or injured, but she was unscathed. Thinking of Qi Feng's words just now, Xiao Xiao should be back. In her previous life, she had not been able to wait for the big wedding, but now, at this time, with this cold-hearted and unfeeling person, she did not know whether it was a blessing or a curse. In the 8th Princess Fu, an imperial guard knelt on the ground and reported, replying to Your Highness, there is news from the border that Tianjin cannot hold on any longer. The genie guards have already entered Tianjin's border, and Tianjin has surrendered. Xianli sat high up in the middle of the room, but his expression was very gentle. It was clear that his subordinate had reported such unpleasant news, but he seemed to be very happy. His smile was even like a spring breeze, which really made people feel that it was a little strange. The advisors did not dare to say a word. In the past year, Xianli had suffered from the Xia family's attack, but his conduct had become more and more stable. For example, not showing one's emotions had already been cultivated to the point of perfection. If Xianli could be said to be able to skillfully wear a gentle mask on his face before, now, this mask had already become one with Xianli. It's faster than I thought. Xianli sighed, is it really impossible to destroy the genie guards? Your Highness, at present, we have not completely gone against Jining Wangfu, and Jining Wang has always maintained a neutral position in the court. It is best to avoid them. An advisor came forward and advised. Currently, Xianli's strength had been weakened by more than half. It was not a wise move to confront Xiao Xiao head-on. Moreover, Xiao Xiao had never cared about the matters of the court. If they could avoid coming into direct contact with him, they would certainly be able to save a lot of trouble. It's too late. Xianli smiled, do you really think that we can get along peacefully with Jining Wangfu? He waved the letter in his hand, everyone, do you know who was the one who set fire to the granary and caused the downfall of the Xia family? The advisors looked at each other. The people that Xianli had sent had been investigating this matter, but in the end, they had not found anything. Xianli was very angry because of this, and this was also a sore point of his. Now, looking at his appearance, did he already know who the person behind this was? Xianli calmly said, "It was Jinying Wangfei, Jiang Ruan." How could it be? Everyone in the room was surprised, that Jinying Wangfei is only a woman, how could she have done such a big thing? Moreover, she cannot predict the future. If all of this was done by Jinying Wangfei, then isn't she too terrifying? Why would she do such a thing and go against your highness? I know that everyone is surprised, but this prince will tell you frankly that this matter was indeed done by Jinying Wangfei. He said meaningfully, "You all think that it is impossible for Jinying Wangfei to do such a thing, and that she has no reason to go against this prince, but have you ever thought that this represents Jinying Wang's intention?" As soon as these words came out, everyone was silent. Xianli looked around before saying, Jinying Wangfei might not have received Jinying Wang's instructions. In fact, Xianli knew that these words were not credible. When he had learned from his spies that Jiang Ruan was the person behind the Xia family's disturbance, he had been extremely surprised, but he had almost immediately believed it. He had always felt that Jiang Ruan was a little strange, although he knew that this suspicion was somewhat inexplicable. The other party was just a young lady of an official family who did not understand anything. How could she have such powerful means? But every time he saw Jiang Ruan, Xianli would have an indescribable feeling. He always felt that Jiang Ruan had a hidden hatred towards him. Although he had not done anything to make Jiang Ruan hate him. After knowing this news, Xianli was extremely furious. His great undertaking had been destroyed by the hands of a woman. Jiang Ruan's arrangement had caused him to waste the Xia family's resources. Later, he had even lost the 800 carriages of soldiers' pay. He had really suffered a double loss. Every time he thought of this, Xianli wished that he could immediately kill that woman. Xiao Xiao is about to return to the court. Xianli smiled, "I want to give him a gift." Jinying Wangfu was a very special existence in the Jin dynasty. For so many years, he could not even touch the true power of the Genie guards. If he had previously had other thoughts about Jinying Wangfu, now that he knew that Jiang Ruan had harmed him, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Sometimes, some things had to be taken out of desperation. Xianli did not want Jiang Ruan to marry Xiao Xiao. If Jiang Ruan was really as scheming as the spies had reported, and she was together with Xiao Xiao, then the power of Jinying Wangfu would be too terrifying. Taking advantage of the fact that Xiao Xiao had not returned, he needed to confirm one thing and also wanted to solve a problem. Xianli slowly clenched his fists. Chapter 181. Xia Qing and Qi Feng looked at each other, shrugged their shoulders and said, "All right, the eldest sister-in-law is like a mother, I will listen to the third sister-in-law." Everyone stared at her blankly. Perhaps some people did not understand why Jiang Ruan, as a noble princess and the mistress of the entire Wangfu, would be willing to stay here. She clearly knew that this was a conspiracy, yet she refused to retreat. That pair of beautiful eyes clearly had the look of a hungry wolf, solitary courage and extreme indifference. She was ignoring her own life. Lu Zhu rolled her eyes and simply bypassed housekeeper Lin and walked into the room without looking back. Jiang Ruan stood in front of everyone. The darker the night, the more beautiful her complexion became. In such a perilous situation, her gaze was like a threatening billow, and the corners of her mouth held a faint smile. She was calm, but everyone could feel the faint murderous intent emanating from her. She said, "Everyone, there is no need for me to say anything more. Tonight, someone wants to break into Jinying Wangfu. I do not know what their purpose is, but they have come with ill intentions. You are all people of Jinying Wangfu. Now, someone wants to step into your courtyard, possibly kill your relatives, rob your treasures, or even accuse you of being an assassin. The servants of Jinying Wangfu were carefully selected, so they were not stupid. It was very strange for the officers and soldiers to suddenly come to catch the assassins at such a late hour, so it was smart to keep an eye on them. Jiang Wan smiled and said, "It's nothing. Catching an assassin also requires an official seal and a token. Since you are not willing to open the door, it shows that they have not taken out these two tokens. Since they do not have these two tokens, they cannot prove their identity. Jining Wangfu is not some small family. Even if it is a small family, they cannot just barge in. You do not need to pay attention to these people. You have done very well." Housekeeper Lin was startled by the ruthlessness in Jiang Ruan's words and immediately replied, "Yes. A woman's wedding dress originally carried all the hopes of a woman for the future, and she would use all her strength to make it more beautiful. In this life, she was not particularly tempted by all the beautiful things, but Xiao Xiao was actually so considerate." Lu Zhu was so shocked that her mouth was wide open. She stared blankly for a long time before muttering, "Son-in-law is really generous. He wants Miss to wear the entire minister's mansion." Jiang Ruan's heart sank, and she coldly said, "It is indeed a good strategy to kill several birds with one arrow." She came back to her senses and looked at Qi Feng and Xia Qing. She smiled slightly and said, "In short, Xiao Xiao is coming back, and my elder brother is also coming back. I'm afraid that the originally stable situation in the capital will soon change again. Don't take it lightly recently. I'm not worried about young Master Qi, but young Master Xia." Everyone was shocked by her words, and Lu Zhu was a little anxious. "Miss, now is not the time to show off. Since those people dared to break into the prince's mansion at night, they must have some tricks up their sleeves. What if something happens to them? What does it have to do with you?" Qi Feng hit Xia Qing's head fiercely. "Third brother's money was not earned by you. This Jining Wangfu was not built by you. Other people's money could be used however they wanted. What's wrong with third sister-in-law wearing a wedding dress? If I marry a wife like third sister-in-law, I will certainly do my best to find her a dress that matches her." As soon as he finished speaking, Qi Feng suddenly realized what he was saying. He could not help but pause and look at Jiang Ruan with some uneasiness. Everyone was shocked by these words that were almost cursed. They could not help but look up at this beautiful mistress. She was charming and bright, and her crimson dress fluttered like red flowers in the cold night wind. However, her tone was cruel and piercingly cold, as if she was an evil spirit that had climbed out of hell. The sneer that flowed out of the corner of her eyes contained a kind of contempt that was carved into her bones. Everyone was a little confused. Housekeeper Lin's palms trembled. He did not know why, but he felt that at this time, Jiang Wan was very similar to Xiao Xiao. It was a kind of strength and tenacity that came from her bones. She would not be frightened by anything. Even if a knife was in front of her in the next second, she would still have the courage to calmly order her servants to lay out the plan. These two people were actually so bored to use this matter as a bet. Jiang Wan blushed slightly with shame. She only felt that Xiao Xiao's fellow apprentices had a very lively temperament. She did not know how Xiao Xiao had been raised to be so taciturn. At this moment, Xia Qing's clear voice could be heard, but regardless of whether it is 50,000 or 100,000, third brother is really too wasteful. How can there be such an expensive piece of clothing? That money can be used to open a few more charity halls. Who knows how many people can be saved? Jiang Wan coldly ordered, "Now, as Jining Wangfei, I order all of you to return to your rooms and find a place to hide. All the imperial bodyguards of the Wangfu, gather here and focus on guarding Xiao Xiao's study and bedroom. If anyone intrudes, kill them without exception. Jin Air, find a way to rush out of the Wangfu. If there is a secret passage, that would be even better. Set all the houses around Jining Wangfu on fire. Jin San and Jin Si, the two of you release the signal flares. The genie guards cannot appear, but the Zhao family can." Her eyes were incomparably cold and her tone was unfathomable, if you want to step into this place, you must first see if you have the ability. Weigh the depth of Jinying Wangfu, and I will make sure that they will not be able to return. Jiang Yuan let Bai Ji and the others put away the wedding clothes and pushed open the door to walk out. As soon as she walked out, she saw Xia Qing and Qi Feng sitting in front of the stone table in the courtyard. Seeing her arrival, Qi Feng laughed and teased, "I heard from the servants in this fu that the wedding clothes of Bao Yu Lu have arrived. Fifth brother and I are currently making a bet." Everyone laughed again. Jiang Ruan's gaze fell on the wedding clothes and she could not help but shake her head. If this set of clothes were to be worn outside, she did not know what kind of commotion it would cause. Xiao Xiao's wedding clothes were equivalent to the entire property of a fifth-ranked official in the capital. It was estimated that after the marriage, even if she did not have the reputation of a demoness who brought disaster to the country, she would not be able to escape being a femme fatale. Housekeeper Lin looked at Lu Zhu and sternly said, "Since you have so many people by young Furin's side, you should also know the people that young Furin usually sees. This wedding banquet cannot be done carelessly. The more exquisite it is, the more it will show the respect that our Wangfu has for young Furin. In this way, young Furin will have face, and as young Furin's servant, you will also be proud. Besides, since you have followed young Furin into the Wangfu, you are also a part of the Wangfu. You should regard yourself as one of us. Young miss, how can you be so impatient? Come, take a look. How about making this small porridge with a lighter Jiangnan flavor?" At this moment, Jiang Yuan was thinking that in the blink of an eye, the time had come for her to marry Xiao Xiao. In this life, she was not willing to repeat the mistakes of her previous life, so every move she made was to avoid walking down the path of her previous life. In her previous life, she had not been able to become an upright wife. On the surface, an imperial concubine seemed to be glorious, but in actuality, she was still a concubine of the emperor. Becoming the young Furin of Jinying Wangfu was tantamount to having a solid backing. Xiao Xiao's power would make it much more convenient for her to do many things, but the most important thing was that she would be able to completely break away from Xian Li's shadow. In this life, she had finally severed her last connection with Xian Li in the matter of love. From now on, she would be a woman of the Xiao family, and not of the Xian family. Before your master left, he entrusted Jinying Wangfu to me, and I promised to protect its stability. Every plant and tree in this fu may be closely related to the future of the Wangfu, so it cannot be taken lightly. So, tonight, I will also do the same. I will fulfill my promise to your master. I will not abandon this Wangfu and leave. I will be with you. Bandits have come in. If you do not leave, I will not leave either. I will stay here until the very last moment. Housekeeper Lin also rushed over from the courtyard outside. Seeing Jiang Yuan, he heaved a sigh of relief. Now, everyone in Jinying Wangfu regarded Jiang Yuan as a proper female master. Once something happened, as long as Jiang Yuan was present, they would bypass Housekeeper Lin and directly report to Jiang Yuan. Housekeeper Lin's usual playful expression had completely disappeared, and he sternly said, "Young Furin, this place is too dangerous. Later, let the embroidered uniform guards that Master left behind protect you as you leave this place. Master's keepsake is still there, so it will be able to protect you." Returning to the capital from the border was a long and arduous journey, and it would take some time before they could return. Even so, Jinying Wangfu still began to get busy. Every day, Housekeeper Lin arranged what to do after Xiao Xiao returned to the fu. The most important thing was Xiao Xiao and Jiang Ruan's wedding. Before Xiao Xiao had left the capital, the Empress Dowager had issued an imperial decree that the marriage would be completed as soon as he returned to the court. Now that Jiang Yuan had also finished her mourning period, it was only a matter of time before she sat on the position of young Furin of Jinying Wangfu. Housekeeper Lin had been planning since he had received the imperial decree a year ago. Jiang Yuan had thought that everything was in order, but who knew that Housekeeper Lin was still worried about this matter. From the water essence beads stuck on the wedding invitation to the carved patterns on the ivory chopsticks used at the banquets, it was simply a matter of great importance. Now, act immediately, she ordered. The entire body of the wedding dress was a bright red, but it was not an ordinary red. It was as if the rosy clouds in the sky were slowly enshrouding the clouds. It was warm, soft, and incomparably gorgeous. The fabric was a two-nest cloud-patterned cape, embroidered with gold and silver luan birds and phoenixes. The gold and silver threads were extremely fine, and every stitch was exquisitely embroidered. The luan birds stretched out their necks and flew in the air, and a colorful phoenix's tail was charming and gentle. The bottom was studded with colorful gems, and when it gently swayed, it was almost dazzling. Being praised by Jiang Yuan, the manservant blushed a little, but he immediately put on a deeply worried expression. Young Furen is right, but those people are coming aggressively. From the entrance, I heard that the battle is not small. If you are not willing to open the door, I'm afraid that they will not leave the matter at that. Jiang Yuan quickly turned around and walked towards the main hall of the Wang Fu. It seems like a reckless action, but it happens to be at this time. If the genie guards are summoned, we can find out the true strength of genieing Wang Fu. If we abandon the Wang Fu and escape, we may be able to find out the secret of the Wang Fu. If we want to take someone's life, it will be even easier. They are simply bandits, but a clever bandit. Xianli, sure enough, was not so easy to get rid of. Now that she had made a move, it was so aggressive. She walked quickly, her footsteps not stopping at all. Her long fox fur cloak drew a gorgeous arc in the night. This matter should not be delayed. Old Lin, gather all the people in the Fu in the front hall. Tonight, no one is allowed to take a step out of genieing Wang Fu. Tianzhu stood quietly by Jiang Ruan's side. From the time she had followed Jiang Yuan, she understood that the master she followed was in some ways the same as the genie guards. No matter how the outside world changed, her heart would always be strong. Jiang Yuan muttered to herself for a moment, then shook her head. No. What do you mean? Steward Lin asked. Jiang Yuan turned a deaf ear to him and seemed to be thinking about something else. Qi Feng's eyes darkened. Xia Qing touched her head and said in an aggrieved tone, "Fourth brother, you are increasingly leaning towards third sister-in-law. She is not your wife, why are you so protective of her? Do you still want the friendship of fellow disciples? What do you want to bet?" Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. Jiang Yuan felt strange in her heart. She did not know when they were making the dress, so how did Xiao Xiao know her measurements? However, this was indeed not the time to worry about this. Although she knew that Bao Yu Lu had always made clothes for the concubines in the palace, even Jiang Yuan could not help but suck in a breath of cold air when she got her hands on this wedding dress. Steward Lin stared blankly and raised his head to look at Jiang Yuan. Jiang Yuan stared at him, her always smiling and charming eyes unexpectedly had a bit of sharpness. Steward Lin felt a chill in his heart and no longer dared to hide anything. He opened his mouth and said, "There is. Young master handles official documents in the Fu, and some secret matters are also discussed in the Fu. Although this old servant is not very clear, I know that there should be a lot of important things in the Fu. Although the protection is very good, it is inevitable that people will be able to use it against them." The phoenix coronet was also exquisite and small. It was not heavy, and wearing it would not be strenuous. The emerald green bird feather sparkled and shone, reflecting an enchanting color. The phoenix coronet was adorned with jewels. The golden dragon, the emerald phoenix, and the jewels shone brilliantly. It was magnificent, and not something that ordinary craftsmen could achieve. The golden dragon on the phoenix coronet soared above the emerald clouds, and the emerald phoenix spread its wings among the jewels and flowers. The most moving thing was the bead in the mouth of the emerald phoenix in the middle. The bead was crystal clear and smooth, and its color was faintly transparent. It could emit a bright luster as one walked. Wearing such a phoenix coronet, it really made one's whole body shine brightly. She spoke coldly, as if she was talking about something that would happen in other people's homes, but the hearts of the people below were shocked. Guessing what might happen and actually hearing the truth from someone else's mouth were two different things. Everyone's gaze changed slightly. As they were speaking, they heard someone report from outside, "Young madam, Master Xia and Master Qi have come to see you." Seeing that Jiang Yuan had an idea, Baiji did not obstruct her. After all, there were secret guards outside to protect her, so there would not be any big trouble. Jiang Yuan had just walked into the courtyard when she saw a manservant hurriedly run in. His tone was somewhat anxious as he said, "Young madam, there is a group of people outside. They claim to be officials who are here to arrest assassins. This lowly one does not dare to open the door and has come to ask for young madam's opinion." Not only that, there were also luxurious hairpins and ornaments, double-rang golden rings, 100 knots in the same heart, and wedding shoes embroidered with mandarin ducks. Jiang Yuan had already seen the splendor and riches of the palace in her previous life, and she had also seen the empress's court dress. At this moment, when she saw this, she could not help but be somewhat absent-minded. Housekeeper Lin's movements were indeed very fast. In less than the time it takes to burn half an incense stick, everyone had already gathered in the front hall of Jining Wangfu. Jiang Yuan stood in the courtyard of the front hall, in front of everyone. Housekeeper Lin stood on one side, and Jean Eyre and a few secret guards followed behind Jiang Yuan without saying a word. Everyone's gaze fell on this future young madam of Jining Wangfu. Tonight's situation was dangerous, yet this woman was not willing to escape alone. This action had already won the favor of the servants of Jining Wangfu. There was not a single young lady in the capital who was not delicate and delicate. To have such courage and insight was already admirable. But if she was bold but not astute, it would not bring good luck to Jining Wangfu. Therefore, everyone wanted to see what Jiang Yuan could come up with. Jiang Yuan nodded and closed the book. Just as she walked to the door, she heard a sound coming from outside. It seemed to be the sound of something exploding. She frowned. At this hour, how could there be any firecrackers? She always had a kind of unexpected intuition when it came to danger. Immediately, she put on a coat, stood up, and was about to walk out of the courtyard to take a look. It was windy at night. Baiji got up to close the window. Unexpectedly, she discovered that outside, it had already begun to drizzle sporadically. The cold winter night was already very cold, and when the rain fell on people's bodies, they immediately felt a slight chill. Baiji closed the window and looked at Jiang Yuan, who was still sitting at the table reading, and said, "Miss, you should rest early. When the rain gets heavier, be careful not to catch a cold." Human lives were not difficult to explain. Today, this Jining Wangfu only had one more person. As for other things, Jiang Yuan looked at housekeeper Lin. How many imperial bodyguards are there in total in this fu? If Jining Wangfu became the target of public criticism, and the other party dared to be so rampant tonight, they must have made excellent preparations. It was not safe for Jiang Yuan to stay here. In any case, the young madam of Jining Wangfu would always be the first priority. Returning to the room, Lian Xiao and Baiji were surrounding Jiang Yuan for some unknown reason. Even Tian Zhu was standing to the side watching. Lu Zhu asked curiously, what is this?" Just as he finished speaking, as if to reflect his words, he saw the guard who was guarding the door rushing over. "Young madam, it's not good. Those people have already begun to force their way into the fu. This subordinate has taken a look. There are too many of them, and they are all armed with bows and arrows. They have come with ill intentions. I am afraid that it will be very dangerous." What Qi Feng had said was indeed correct. Not long after, the soldiers of Tianjin were defeated, and they bowed their heads to the great Jin dynasty. The fact that this war had lasted for so long was beyond everyone's expectations. The country of Tianjin was merely a small place, but they did not know when it had gained the power to contend with the great Jin dynasty. This was really thought-provoking. However, in any case, besides giving the great Jin dynasty a warning, they were still defeated. The emissary brought the letter of surrender and the great Jin army that had returned to the court with them to the capital to meet the emperor. Among them, the news of the ceding of land and reparations spread like wildfire. As for the specifics, each person had their own version of it, and no one knew which piece of news was true. Lu Zhu secretly laughed at the side. Xia Qing was unconvinced and said, "What about me? Third sister-in-law, how can you treat me differently?" Lu Zhu bypassed Steward Lin and made a begging gesture. "Steward Lin, this list of snacks has already been changed dozens of times. I really can't think of anything else. Please spare me, I am only a servant." "No." Jiang Yuan flatly refused. "Since these people dare to come here so arrogantly, they may have other intentions. I am afraid that they want to probe the depths of the brocade guards. Are there any secrets in this Wang Fu?" Lian Qiao burst out laughing and said, "Nonsense. What do you mean by wearing a minister's fu?" She took a look at the wedding dress that was so exquisite that it did not seem like something that could only be found in the mortal world. She laughed even more happily. How could the minister's fu have enough to buy this wedding dress? Ever since Jiang Quan's attitude towards Jiang Yuan had become colder and colder, and he had not even taken the initiative to ask about Jiang Yuan once in a year, the few servant girls by Jiang Ruan's side had already turned cold towards Jiang Quan. Originally, they had thought that one day, Jiang Quan would see the good in Jiang Ruan. After all, they were biological father and daughter. Even if the bones were broken, the tendons were still connected. How could it be broken just like that? But now, they no longer wanted to mention him. In any case, Jiang Yuan was about to marry into Jining Wang Fu. In the future, she would be a member of Jining Wang Fu, so why would she care about those unrelated people? Without this layer of apprehension, Lian Qiao was no longer polite when speaking to the Jiang Fu. "Let's bet on how much third brother's wedding dress is worth." Xia Qing's baby face was exceptionally likable, and when she spoke in such a serious manner, she appeared even more adorable. "Fourth brother guessed that it is 100,000 taels, I think it is 50,000 taels. The soft couch in front of Jiang Yuan was slanted with a layer of things. After walking closer, Lu Zhu could see clearly and could not help but exclaim, "What a beautiful wedding dress. There are a total of 180 imperial guards. The manservants and maids all have some martial arts." Housekeeper Lin said, "But compared to the people outside, these are like mantises trying to stop a chariot. They use bows and arrows. Moreover, the troops and horses are orderly. They are simply using the methods of an army to attack our Wang Fu. Young madam, this place is really dangerous." Before young master left, he should have left behind a token. If young madam must stay, how about calling the genie guards to protect young madam? Most of the wedding dresses that this woman wore when she got married were embroidered by herself. Moreover, she had already started sewing her own wedding dress a few years ago. The craftsmanship of the wedding dress also showed the woman's needlework. As the girl embroidered the wedding dress, her mood was naturally sweet. However, when Jiang Yuan received the Empress Dowager's decree, she was in too much of a hurry. Even though she had moved to Jining Wang Fu, she did not think about the wedding dress every day. Moreover, time was too tight, so she simply did not embroider. When the time came, she planned to ask a clothing shop in the capital to make one for her, as long as she did not lose Jining Wang Fu. Who knew that the shopkeeper of Bao Yu Lu would come to deliver the wedding dress today? He said that when Xiao Xiao had left the capital, he had instructed Bao Yu Lu to make it for him. What kind of person was Jining Wang? If he accepted this order, he would be able to eat for 3 years. The shopkeeper invited the best embroidery maids and put in 120% effort. Finally, before Xiao Xiao returned, the dress was finished for Jiang Yuan. "You are kind-hearted and have a gentle temperament. It is inevitable that you will be used by others. Jiang Wan smiled. Before Xiao Xiao and the others return to the capital, be careful. Qi Feng really wanted to ruthlessly beat up this young martial brother of his. However, in the blink of an eye, he saw that Jiang Wan had a pensive look on her face and his movements slowed down. Generally speaking, Jinying Wang Fu was like an impenetrable fortress. No one would think of breaking into Jinying Wang Fu. However, at this critical juncture, when Xiao Xiao was about to return to the capital, he had brought troops with him. Moreover, he had used the formation of the army. Presumably, the outside had already been surrounded, and there was no one who could deliver a letter to other places. The other party had used such an obvious method. It was nothing more than to ask for two things. One was for human lives, and the other was for other things in Jinying Wang Fu. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.